If I could have everyone please quiet down their conversation as the event is going to begin. So I would like to welcome everyone to the 21st Annual UCCS Economic Forum. My name is Ron Chernak, and I may appear to be much younger this year. No, that's because my name is not Ron Chernak. My name is Samuel Elliott, and I am a Bachelor of Innovations graduate from UCCS, a graduate from the College of Business, and former UCCS student body president. And now I am co-founder of Tejon Technologies, a database software company here in Colorado Springs. It is my pleasure to be with all of you wonderful people. I would like to recognize the organizing committee and the man who I impostered, Ron Chernak. For those of you who don't know, this event in this year marks the 21st anniversary of this economic forum. And it all started when Ron saw an event similar to this in Denver and said, Colorado Springs could benefit from this. And looking at the number of people in the room with us this afternoon, there is no question that Colorado Springs has benefited from this event. So thank you to everyone who has made this 21st year incredible. Give them a round of applause. You all will find question cards on your table for the economists. There will be a Q&A panel after each of them have their presentations. So during their presentations, when they are going over their information, if you have a question about it, write it down on one of those question cards so we have plenty of questions that are relevant for all of you during that Q&A panel. Those of you who will need the continued education certifications, you can get those after the event. And please share on social media using the hashtag #EconForum. You can also ask questions on Twitter using that hashtag as well. And there will be more announcements at the end of the event, including the door prize. I would like to start with a quick personal story of my involvement in this economic forum. 3 years ago, as I was a sophomore at UCCS, just getting involved in the business community, trying to figure out what events do I go to, who do I talk to, this crazy redheaded lady named Tatiana reached out to me as a UCCS student and said, yeah, I run the economic forum. And she invited me to attend. I told her I don't know what to expect. She said, just wear a tie and show up. So I attended the event and I sat next to this guy. And I had no idea who this guy was, but he carried himself so well, I knew he had to be someone important. So I mustered up the courage to introduce myself and shake his hand, and he said he was Colorado Attorney General John Suthers. Now, back then I didn't know what an Attorney General did, to be honest with all of you. And to continue to be honest, as soon as I ended that conversation with him and his wife, I Googled it on my phone, Attorney General, and sure enough, someone that was important and is very important to Colorado Springs today. I share this because 3 years ago, the Economic Forum was the first professional event I attended in Colorado Springs. And to say that I left excited is an understatement. I left with the mindset that Colorado Springs had more opportunities because of the expected growth in this city than any other city I could move to in the nation. And at that point, I promised myself I was going to make an impact in this city and make a name for myself in the business community. And here I am as the Master of Ceremonies at this event, and I cannot thank all of the people in this room who have taken the time to mentor me and grab coffee with me over the past 3 years. And I'm also very excited to share with you that we have more young professionals and students in this room than ever before that, just like me 3 years ago, this may be their first professional event in the Colorado Springs community. If you're one of those students, can you please raise your hand? Or if this is one of your first business professional events, can you please raise your hand? I know we have a table somewhere, but just raise your hand. Where are they at? We have so many people in the room, it's hard to see. A lot over there. Give them a round of applause. But more importantly, if someone is at your table that you don't recognize, that may be younger, I want you to give them your business card, reach out to them, ask them what they're interested in, and offer to grab coffee with them, because those people are the future of the workforce here in Colorado Springs. And the more we can connect with them, the better Colorado Springs will be in the future. Now on with the program. I am honored to introduce the man who I will always recognize as the Dean of the College of Business, and today I am very proud to announce as the Chancellor of the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, Dr. Venkat Reddy.
Thank you, Sam. Wouldn't you want to hire that student if you're as a graduate, fresh graduates? That's the kind of students we produce at UCCS. Great job, Sam. Well, I want to say first thank you to Ron for his relentless support of the forum. Ron, we can't thank you enough for founding this forum and bringing it to here today. And I know I saw Tom's line as well. Tom, wave your hand wherever you are. So thank you, Tom and Ron. And Tatiana, thank you for continuing to innovate the forum and taking it to higher levels. Great job. I thought you all memorized my old speech. So this is all new. You heard as a dean of business school. But really, as a chancellor, I want to say a few words to you. Collaboration and community are two key words that define the spirit of the UCCS Economic Forum, which is now in its 21st year. And this year, I'm delighted speaking to you in my new role as the Chancellor of the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. UCCS and the College of Business have supported the forum since its inception. And thank you, really, the community has come together in a strong way to support this forum. So many of you are here today, so thank you. I want to say we are on a very strong trajectory. And when I came in as chancellor, I thought we'll be out of money, we won't be able to do anything, but we have still a few surprises up our sleeve. For the past several years, you've seen the cranes up on Austin Bluffs signaling our growth. The new parking garage with the soccer field on the top. New residence halls, the Lane Center, and now under construction, the National Cybersecurity Center on North Nevada Avenue in the TRW building. The INT Center for the Arts, we're excited to see it open in January. And a new baseball stadium and the indoor practice facility a little north of just below the Pulpit Rock. And if that were not enough, there'll be something else coming soon, the William J. Hibble Sports Medicine and Performance Center, which will be pretty magnificent, and we hope to see that to completion by end of 2019. With all those construction projects, I want to commit to one thing. We will continue to stay focused on our student success. Academic excellence is our focus and our destination, but all these things that we're doing will align with that goal. We'll continue to work hard to keep our students in school and help them graduate so they become productive citizens in our community. We'll continue to deepen our ties with the community in a variety of ways, through our faculty and staff, through our internships and placements, through research opportunities, our traditional and innovative program offerings. Believe it or not, we are expecting almost 1,000 exercise science students when the new Hibble building opens up, or when it continues its progress. Increasing our number of public-private partnerships, such as the Quad Innovation Program and several capital and programmatic projects. UCCS will continue to be a strong economic engine for our community to the tune of $450 million so far, and more to come. And I'm looking forward to hearing the international, national, and regional economic outlook as we look forward to this program. Many of you might know I'm also a finance professor, so this is an exciting topic for me. And I also look forward to connecting with you, many of you in my new role. And really, thank you for all the support you've given me and to our campus, and I continue to hope to connect with you in a very significant way. Now I'd like to introduce Interim Dean of the College of Business, Dr. Erik Olson, to come and say a few words. Thank you.
For the past 21 years, the College of Business has been the home to the Economic Forum. And just as the forum has grown from that initial idea that Tom Zwerlein wove back in 1995, so too has the little College of Business on the Hill grown. Today we employ over 100 faculty, staff, and adjunct faculty instructors. Our MBA program is over 300 online and on-campus students. Our undergraduate program is just under 1,300 students, with an additional 500 business intent students who wish to get into the program, but whose admission standards don't quite match up yet and are working to do so. Our offices, our classrooms are about 90% capacity. Demand is soaring. Economic times are good. Now, in addition to our enrollments, we have some very exciting programs. This past year, we launched the Master of Science in Accountancy. The Bachelor of Innovation program continues to bring in students with a dual interest in engineering and in business. Our Professional Golf Management program has been reinvigorated with the hiring of Adam Scott as our new director. And the Sport Management program has grown to be the second largest undergraduate major in the college and challenges possibly next year for top. This coming January, we have 4 students who will be going overseas for work experiences with some of the biggest soccer clubs in the world, including Watford, West Ham United, Everton, and Manchester City, the richest soccer club on the planet. These are kind of programs that are offered nowhere else, and they're turning our school into a destination place where students from across the country and the world come to study. We also have some exciting professional development programs. So let's see, some of you, I'm guessing, your economy or your job employers are doing well, and you might be going to hire another student or worker next year. Well, let's try to keep some of our young people home. Let's try to provide them with jobs and give them the opportunity, and maybe you want to try before you buy. So if you have an internship opportunity, please talk to Dr. Megan Steed about how we can work with you. Some of you might be thinking that you'd like to go back for graduate school, but you're thinking, I don't know if I can really afford to take that time and effort to jump into the whole MBA program. Well, this semester we started a new program, the Mini MBA, through our Office of Professional Education Development, and you would want to talk to Shauna Lippert about this because it's very exciting. For a relatively small amount of money, you can get exposed to a variety of topics and perhaps then launch yourself back into graduate school. Some of you may be thinking that your employees could use a customized class in a specific topic, such as value chain management or service marketing. Well, again, we have the ability to offer that through the extended program, these custom programs tailored to your company's needs. So again, please try to find out Shauna Lippert and find out about these opportunities. Last night, before I leave, I want to just briefly mention our affiliation partnership with the Daniels Ethics Fund Initiative out of Denver. The Daniels Fund has spent over $500 million promoting ethics in business and across culture. And we are one of 9 originating schools that have formed an academic partnership with them, and we look to expand that and help bring on a variety of other colleges from around our western region. With that, I'd like to sign off and I turn it over back to our program director, but I'll say, if you haven't been up to UCCS recently, come up the hill and look at the little, not so little College of Business up there. Thank you very much.
And now, we would like to share a video from that Attorney General guy, now Colorado Springs Mayor, John Suthers, who wishes he could be with us today.
I'm Mayor John Suthers. Welcome to the UCCS Economic Forum. On the November ballot, the citizens of Colorado Springs will have the opportunity to remedy a problem that's really been haunting us for 2 decades. Colorado Springs grew tremendously over the last 50 years. About 80% of our growth has occurred in the last 50 years. The city's 150 years old. And our stormwater systems have not kept pace. This became patently clear in the late 1990s when we had large flooding incidents, including one in which 68 million gallons of raw sewage went into Fountain Creek. That caused the mayor and council in the early 2000s to create a stormwater fee, which is what virtually every major city in America has to pay for stormwater infrastructure, maintenance, and operations. But unfortunately, in 2009, Doug Bruce ran a campaign against that fee, calling it a rain tax, and the voters urged the council to do away with it, and they did on a 5-4 vote in 2009. Since then, our stormwater spending out of our general fund has been grossly inadequate, and that's led to two major legal issues. Pueblo gave us notice of a suit that they were going to try and stop the Southern delivery system from going online because when we had got their permission to build the system, we had a stormwater program that was funded by the fee, and we had done away with that. We resolved that issue with Pueblo by promising to spend the same amount over the next 20 years that we would have spent had we still the fee in place. That's about $460 million. We're still in litigation with the EPA over what's called an MS4 permit, a water quality permit. They're alleging because of our inadequate spending, we're not cleaning up the water enough through detention ponding and things like that before we put it into Fountain Creek. We need to, once again, reestablish a stormwater fee that will pay for infrastructure, maintenance, and operations. We've promised Pueblo to do 71 infrastructure projects over the next 20 years. We'll have to spend this money because of legal obligations in any event, but if we continue to spend it out of general fund, we will not be able to expand our police department, our fire department to meet the needs of the community. We need to join every other major community in the country by having a stormwater fee. $5 flat rate residential fee per month, $30 per acre per month for non-residential. That will be on the November ballot. If we're able to pass this, Colorado Springs will be on sound economic footing for at least the next 20 years. US Ignite is a nonprofit organization that goes to communities such as ours and helps them essentially accelerate the provision of high-speed internet. What I like to say is they're trying to help us figure out what the future of the internet is going to be. Figuring out the future of the internet today, come up with applications that will allow us to be a smart city. There's all kinds of technology being developed for cities, whether it be street lights, whether it be parking meters, whether it be watering monitors in parks that will save money for cities. And US Ignite shows us how to take advantage of the internet and higher speed internet use to create applications that will allow us to be among the top ranked smart cities in the future. In many ways, our desire to hire more police and firefighters is dependent upon being able to fund our stormwater through a stormwater fee and not out of the general fund. We have legal obligations that have to be met. If we have to meet them by paying $20 million a year out of general fund the next 20 years, that will hamper our ability to increase the police and fire staffing to meet the growing community. Right now we have 14 police officers per 10,000 people on the street. We really need about 17 for a city our size. And that's impacting us because of our response times. We'd like to be able to respond to any critical incident within 8 minutes. Right now, we're only getting to critical incidents in 8 minutes, a little less than half the time. And our average response is getting close to 12 minutes. That's not acceptable. And no amount of technology can fix that problem. You need more police officers. We need to hire about 120 more police officers over the next 5 to 6 years. Our ability to do that, as I say, is largely dependent on being able to free up general fund by reinstating a stormwater fee that will pay for our stormwater legal obligations.
It is my pleasure and with great excitement to invite Erik Davidson, Chief Investment Officer of Wells Fargo, and Michael Serio, Regional Chief Investment Officer, to the stage. Give them a hand.
Check. Well, thank you. It is certainly an honor to be here. I mean, look at this crowd. And Erik and I feel very fortunate that you invited us out here today. So we came all the way here. What do we want to talk about? First, I will start with the economy, the U.S. economy and markets. I got to tell you, very few times is there this much to talk about. And it's a very exciting time to do what we do. I'll pass it over to Erik, and he'll go on with the global economy and markets. He's got a great background, not just in international economics, but actually he's getting his doctorate in behavioral economics. And very interesting. I'm kind of jealous about that. He'll talk about guidance for investors and what we're doing, and then later we want to talk about what's on your mind. So let's start with the U.S. economy and markets. And I've been looking at the news, as I'm sure everybody has, and if you would just look at the news, you would think things are terrible, and certainly they're terrible at some places. We've had some bad weather, we've had some bad events out there, and we're going to stay with the dismal science of economics if that's okay. But we want to talk about some of the good things. And again, I've been using this quote by Erik Severide, for those of us who are old enough to remember him, that the biggest big business in America is not steel, automobiles, or television. It's the manufacture, refinement, and distribution of anxiety. I tell you, anxiety sells, doesn't it? Nobody wants to go and see, hey, you know, the employment numbers look good, or the purchasing manager's index looks really good. No, that doesn't sell. It's how bad you have it, and that's what sells. But we're going to go through some things that are really good, and then we're going to talk about some things that could use a little work out there. So let's get to the first thing, and that's the U.S. stock market. We're at a record high right now. Now, you want to think of the U.S. stock market as just not an asset to put in your portfolio, not just a thermometer of what's going on, but a barometer of the economy. And we've had a couple things propping up the market over the last 6, 7, 8 years. And the first is this great experiment, quantitative easing, which has lowered interest rates and propped up the market. But what we're seeing now is companies coming back with some pretty solid earnings growth. And you know, you need two things for risky assets to rise, is you need, number one, low interest rates and good earnings growth, and we have both right now. So we're actually in a really good time, and we're not just in a good time on market levels, but if you look at volatility. And one thing we use to measure volatility, it's called the VIX, and it's the implied volatility in the options market. Generally, we think the options market is a pretty smart market. And when we look at it right there, you can see that on average, we use about, call it 15, 16 in our models when we plan for clients as a volatility number. And over the last year or so, it's been around 9 or 10, significantly lower than that 15, 16 number, which is telling us that although this is one of the most unloved markets we've ever seen, and the second longest bull market on record, there isn't a lot of anxiety out there, which is good, which is good. But let's get to some of the things that we're also looking at. Who would have thought that the anxiety in the system 20 years ago would have been oil prices too low? Now, we actually think we are in, and I'm sorry for people in E&P, exploration and production in the oil and gas business, but we actually think we're in about a 10 to 15 bear market for most commodities, including oil. And in the short term, prices of commodities are dependent upon growth and demand. And longer term, what our research has shown, it's dependent upon supply. And with the advent of unconventional oil and gas drilling, the ability to go down 2 miles and go into the source rock has shown us that there's about 6 to 7 more generations of BTUs under us than we thought there was as late as '07. And we've been talking to clients about this. In '07, we were talking about peak oil, if you remember that there's all the easy oil was found already. And that lifting cost, what it takes to get it out of the ground, we're going to go to $80, $90, $100, $200 a barrel. And that Saudi Arabia, because their lifting cost is only $5 a barrel, is going to own the world. We're not talking about that anymore. We're actually talking about peak demand, and we're talking about actually peak auto. And that with the advent of Lyft, Uber, self-driving cars, that you may not have 2, 3 cars in your driveway going forward, and we'll be able to take the same infrastructure we have right now and put more people on the road, and that gets very exciting for us. The inflation. Who would have thought that we would be worried about low inflation or even deflation like we did 7, 8 years ago? Certainly deflation's really bad out there because people put things off if they think prices are going to fall tomorrow, and that really hurts what we call the velocity of money. But if you take a look at the inflation number, it's starting to look pretty good. And certainly when it gets to 4, 5, 6%, certainly when it gets into wage inflation, and we'll talk about that in a second, it gets a little worrisome, but right now things are looking pretty good. So we talked about that. Let's get to household debt service. Every Thursday, we have a strategy session in the morning, and we ask ourselves, what are clients asking us? What do we want to talk about? What are we not seeing? And one of the things that has been worrisome is the amount of debt out there, the gross amount of debt. And when you look at mortgages, it's come down significantly since the end of the Great Recession. But two things have spiked up, and that's student loan debt, which I'm sure people here know well, and then debt on automobiles. But we actually don't think that's a problem right now, because if you take a look at that chart right there, it's not the amount of debt, it's the debt service ratio. Think about it this way. You're somebody, maybe you make $100,000 a year, you take out $1 million loan, which could be kind of onerous, but if you're only paying 1% on interest, that could be okay. You can handle that. If it's a variable rate loan and it spikes up to 8 or 9%, now we have an issue. But if you look at this chart, the debt service ratio of our population right now is near an all-time low. So that's a real positive. Now let's get into something we've been talking about, and we've been slicing and dicing every which way till Sunday, and that's the employment situation. As you can see, we've gotten all the jobs back since the end of 2008 and more. And the employment situation, actually, if you're in the market to look for a job, looks pretty good. If you're in the market to hire, may not look that good. So I'm fortunate to cover 8 states in the Mountain Northwest for Wells Fargo. Anywhere from Colorado to Montana to Alaska to Oregon and everywhere in between. And one of the stories I get when I've talked to clients was I was up in Oregon during planting season. And they were telling me, Mike, if we can shift crops, we're shifting them to those crops that can be mechanically harvested. Because we can't find the labor to pull them from the ground, and they're going to rot on the vine. Things like zucchini. So I guess if we were really smart, we would have gone long zucchini and made a fortune, but that didn't happen. However, the labor market needs to be really understood, and one of those things we look at is the job openings survey. It's what we call the JOLTS survey, Job Opening and Labor Turnover Survey. And these are people quitting their jobs, but the good thing is when that chart rises, like the green bar, like the green chart over there, that means people are quitting, and you don't quit unless you have another job, which tells us that certainly we're going to get some wage inflation in the system, and you can see the gap there between job openings and hires. So that's causing us to be a little bit more concerned about this inflation, which is actually healthy right now, as long as it doesn't go too far. Now, I was looking at the DBJ this morning, and this is a great article. If you looked at the front, Skilled Academy hosts on grand opening, and it's something about putting people back to work, not just with education, but with skills. Because if you look at our employment situation now, our U3 number, which is the headline unemployment number, is about 4.1%, 4.2%. Generally thought that 4% is full employment. And once you get below full employment, now you have a problem with labor. So we took a look at it, and we bifurcated it, or we separated it out by education. So as I mentioned, 4.1% is full employment. I'll tell you what it is if you have a college education or more, it's 2.3%. And if you have a college education at UCCS, you're guaranteed employment, I'm told.
Go out and hire them fast.
You got to hire him fast, because the guy here, boy, I think we'd hire him in a second.
Absolutely. Yeah, Samuel.
Here's the issue. If you have a GED or less, the problem is it's about 6.1%, which are recessionary levels. And I'll put it to people, it's not just the difference between the educated and the less educated, it's the educated and skilled and the less educated and unskilled, which is why programs like this, if you take a look at this article here, they're looking for qualified wood manufacturers and apprentice programs, and I think that's just a wonderful fiscal way to get that line going the right way. Why are we so unhappy? Well, here's one reason. Since the end of World War II and the beginning of the Great Recession, our economy's grown about 3.1% a year. So if you look at this chart, we index it at 1966. The red line is trend growth at 3.1% a year. The actual GDP growth, the last 8.5, 9 years, has been about 1.47%. Now, to put that in perspective, it's about $2.6 trillion of GDP. To put that in perspective, it's about $30,000 a family. Now, in economics, we all know that we can move and slice and dice statistics, and that $30,000 a family is an average, but on average, we're all, 98.6 degrees? Mm-hmm. But if you put your head in the fire and your feet in the freezer, on average, you're still doing okay. Yeah. But what I'm saying is it hurt a lot of people on the lower end of the spectrum. I'm sorry?
A higher level math there.
A higher level of math than it did others. It didn't hurt the upper 1%. It really hurt the people in Peoria, Illinois, and Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. They lost significantly more than $30,000 a family in that time frame. Why? Part of it's regulatory policy. What we research is on average during 08 to 2012, in a low inflation environment where businesses could not put forward to their customers and clients price increases, on average it cost them 13% more in regulatory cost. And if you look at small companies, it's 3 times as much as large companies, which is a shame because small companies do all the hiring in the United States. I went to our compliance people. Wells Fargo has 265,000 employees. Guess how many we have in regulatory and compliance? 28,000. So it's a situation where we can go out and hire another banker that goes out and does loans, or another financial advisor, or we can hire somebody looking at invitations for events like this. But the good news is that the pendulum's going the other way. One of the reasons people in that lower income range have not done well, it's not the people from abroad coming in and taking jobs. It's what we call in economics the substitution of capital for labor or robots. So you have 2 companies here, Amazon and Walmart. They do approximately the same thing. They sell you stuff. Amazon enterprise value is shown right there, a little more than Walmart. Amazon has about 10% the employees that Walmart does, and here's the interesting part as an investor. The average enterprise value for employee is right there. It's over 10 times more for Amazon than it is for Walmart. That's where the world is going, and that's why the world needs more educated and skilled people. Now, just to finish up, we'll talk about the divided recovery here. There was a book called The Forgotten Man written during the recession. The Forgotten Man was actually coined by a gentleman by the name of William Sumner in 1883. He was a Yale economist. And he talked about at the upper end of the spectrum, there's A and B that wants to make it best, makes it better for X, and they tax C, and they forgot to ask C what they were doing. So we looked at that forgotten person after 2 decades of globalization, and we asked ourselves who did better. On that x-axis, we go from poorer to richer, so the emerging markets are on the left side. The richer countries are on the right. And then the y-axis, the more it goes up, how well you did. So you can see the emerging markets did well from global trade. There's China, there's India. You can see the wealthy 1% of the world did very well. Part of that was because they have risk assets, and that when interest rates fall, risk assets rise. But the people that didn't do very well were the middle class of US and Europe, and that's where this populism is coming from, and Erik will talk a little bit about that. But let me kick it over to my boss here, Erik, and he's going to talk about the global economy and some of the things to think about.
Actually, do you want to walk through this?
Well, let me walk through this first, but excuse me. In our view, what do we have going forward? We're not going to get to 3.1% trend growth this year. We're looking at 2.4% this year. That lack of skilled labor will continue to lead for a bifurcated expansion until we get programs like this. We don't think inflation's going to be a problem this year, probably 2.2%. We are telling our clients, though, that it's a really good time to borrow money. We think this Fed balance sheet runoff, this $4 trillion that's going to be released into the system, will enable rates or cause rates to rise a bit. We don't think there's going to be a recession, given what we know now, for at least the next 18 months. And then some things to think about are tax reform and the ACA repeal and replace that we're looking at very closely. Tax reform, some of the terms came out yesterday. It's a negotiated process. It's going to be tough to find out how that, what the end game is going to be there, but we're going to follow it closely. So right now we're doing nothing in our portfolios to reflect that.
Great, well, thank you. So it's really good to be here. Thank you very much. Are we good here? Right. So I'm actually from California, though we moved to Chicago about a month ago. Let's see. Are we going to do okay there? Okay. I had the pleasure of living in Colorado for about 5 years. I lived in Denver. And actually, the Broncos still continue to be my favorite AFC team because my Niners are definitely letting me down this year for sure. But I had the opportunity to get down to the Springs all the time. So I just want to take a quick moment as an outsider just to reflect on all the great things you heard earlier, and you will be hearing about the Springs. And you know, you have, first of all, of course, you have great natural beauty. You stayed here at the Antlers Inn last night, made sure I had a mountain view room, although that didn't help me out very much yesterday or today. I know there's a view there. I've seen it before. So you certainly have all the natural beauty, you all know that, but also there's a dynamic here, there's an excitement here in your community that sometimes maybe you take for granted. So as an outsider, I want to remind you of that. You know, what your community does nationally, obviously in terms of service for our country with the Academy in Fort Carson and on our defense side, but what you do to represent our country with the Olympic City, what you do to serve our country with all the not-for-profit charitable institutions that are headquartered here. There's something in the water here in Colorado Springs that I've always admired, so it's great to be back here, and I hope that you all recognize what you have here. And something in the water is neither an endorsement for or against the stormwater ballot issue, but there is something in the water you got here. So if I could, I want to spend a little time widening out the lens a little bit. Mike shared with you about the U.S. economy, and that certainly is a baseline from which other discussions take place. I want to widen out, talk to you about the global economy, because we do truly live in a global world now, much more so than any of us grew up in. And then Dr. Bailey's got a great presentation to really talk about what's going on in Colorado and what's specifically going on here in your community. And then we will look forward to your questions. So be thinking of those, please. That's always the best part. I want to talk, when we think globally, or even when we think domestically, given the psychological trauma that every single person in this room has been through because of the Great Recession, what we saw with our very own eyes, not through reading textbooks, but what we saw with our own eyes, you know, the worst economic decline since the Great Depression, the worst stock market decline since the Great Crash, the worst housing market decline since the Great Depression. We saw unemployment above 10%. We saw this. This wasn't just hypothetical, this was real. And because of that, there is still, I believe, a psychological scar that's been left on all of us, such that I think it clouds our view, and maybe we're not able to see some of the exciting things that are going on in our own country or even in the world. I remember my grandmother and grandfather, they grew up in the Great Depression. You probably had members of your family like this as well, and they developed idiosyncrasies because of that, and she would insist on washing the aluminum foil and putting it back in the dishwasher, keeping the saran wrap. I don't think it's all that bad for all of us, but I think it's important, again, as Michael mentioned, from a behavioral sense, that's really where my passion is that we have to recognize the behavioral biases that have crept into our psyche as a result of what we've seen. And as we do look outside, I think first and foremost, we see a lot of bad, scary things going on. And spoiler alert, the message that we want to deliver to you is a glass half full view of the world. There are some great things going on. Now, I don't want to, when you leave here today, we don't want you to have 100% glass full or even a 3/4 glass full, but maybe half full. Maybe go crazy and have a 5/8 full view of the world, because there are some good things going on. But Before I talk about the good things, I will acknowledge a lot of the worries out there. I'll make a few comments. I got some slides on some of them, not on everything. If you want to go deeper in the Q&A, we can certainly get there. But certainly North Korea is on people's minds. We get it. We understand it. It's kind of hard to look at this just from a cold, hard economic investment view. You know, if this took a turn for the worse, this would be catastrophic. You know this. There's people in the Colorado Springs area that know this, you know, have much more information about this than many of us ever will. But I would say it's interesting, again, looking at from the cold, hard economic investment view, interesting to see how well the U.S. market has done despite this. The U.S. market today is at an all-time high, as Mike was mentioning. Even more so, the South Korean stock market is near its all-time highs. So that should give you, you know, and keep in mind, Seoul is just 90 miles from the North Korean border, and to the extent that they're confident, to the extent that they see it as saber rattling and bluster, maybe should give all of us some concern. But certainly that is top of mind, and while being a low probability event, would certainly be a huge impact event, most importantly a human impact event, but with economic implications as well. Of course, as we talk with investors, there's lots of concerns about what's going on in Europe, and I'll share a few thoughts on that. I've got a couple slides there. Let's remember, though, as we think about Europe, that this is in aggregate the largest economy in the world. This is a continent that's been at war with each other, not for decades, but for generations, for centuries, for millennia. This is a continent that has different languages, different cultures, and they're trying to knit that together. They've knit together to some respect in terms of economic unity. They've had some success there. They've had some success with monetary unification, but they're still struggling. They have yet to have political unification. They have yet to have fiscal unification. That's really where the challenges are. But I think as we look at Europe and look at the EU or the Eurozone, maybe as sort of an adolescent still going through growing pains, I think we can look back at the history of our own country and remember that we had our own growing pains as well. We actually went as far as having a civil war in our early years. It took us a while before we ourselves had monetary unification. We were not all, the colonies were not all, or the states were not all using a common currency in 1777. So lots to learn there, and I've got a couple slides I want to share on that. Obviously, as we look abroad, there's the refugee issue and concerns there, the assimilation issues. There's talk of infiltration by terrorists, certainly. It is interesting, though, and as Europe sorts through this, and we have seen rising nationalism in Europe. We had German elections this past weekend, which were successful for Angela Merkel, but at the same time indicate there is this growing anti-refugee sentiment. I think as we look back through in history, as we will look back at some point in the future on the present day, this may be an answer to a very severe demographic problem that Europe is facing, and many developed countries, including Japan, where I've spent a good part of my career. But to the extent that they can solve for this, this actually may not be a challenge, but it could in fact be a blessing in disguise. But lots there. Slowing China, I've got a couple slides I'd like to share with you on that, but that is certainly important. Cybersecurity, I mentioned this as a global issue because there are some state actors there that certainly are of concern, but that again is much like North Korea. That causes anxiety, most definitely. The Middle East always seems to be a source of issues and concern, without question. Terrorism, it is interesting from a terrorist standpoint, and again, looking at it through the cold, very cold lens of economics and investments, the impact of terrorism, particularly domestic terrorism, as it relates to the economy and the markets has been very, very small. As you look at terrible atrocities, look at things that have happened in Boston, look at what's happened in Orlando, look at what's happened in San Bernardino. While these have a tragic, heavy human toll, the impact on the overall economy and the markets is very, very minimal. It's only when you have these major terrorist acts such as 9/11 that it really seems to have a hit. to the economy. And then, of course, Russian ambitions and how those play out across the globe. And then there may be other things, and again, we can get deeper into that into the Q&A session. But as I talk with investors, these are the type of things when you talk about international, as you talk about global, invariably our thoughts go first to concerns rather than opportunities. And I don't want to miss the opportunity. So let's talk about what's going on outside of our borders that's exciting, that I want you to be excited about as you leave today. There are 7 billion people on this planet. 7 billion. Only 4% of those people are Americans. 96% of the world's population is outside of our borders. Many of you, probably most of you, have had the chance to, you have passports, you've been out there, you've seen the exciting things that are going on. As you get outside of our borders, you'll see that only 16% of the world economy, GDP, is here in the United States. The other 84% are outside of our borders. A world of opportunity is going on out there. As you look at the world stock market capitalization, about half of it is in the US, the other half is outside. I tell investors all the time, why would you only fish in half the pond? Open it up to all the exciting things that are going on. And likewise in the bond market, about 40% of the bond market is outside the United States. So there's lots of exciting things going on. For those of you that have heard me speak before, I apologize. I've used this slide before, but I think it's so powerful. Each of these colors here represents 1 billion of those 7 billion people. And I think this is just fascinating. Half of those 7 billion people live inside of that circle. Look at that map. For those of you that are old enough, you remember a time like I do when much of that map we couldn't visit. There was this country called the Soviet Union that no longer exists. We couldn't go there. China, now the world's second largest economy, we could not go to China. Parts of Latin America and Central and South America, we could maybe get there, but we wouldn't want to go there because of all that was going on. Southeast Asia was a war zone. Eastern Europe you couldn't get to. Almost every place on this map we can get to pretty easily these days. That is very, very exciting. Capitalism is breaking out all over the world. Consumerism is breaking out all over the world. And to some extent, different forms, democracy is breaking out all over the world. When you have goods and services and labor and capital going across borders, you are much, much less likely to have bullets and bombs and armies and troops going across borders. That's exciting from a human perspective, and it's also exciting from an investment perspective. We can be a part of that right here in Colorado Springs, investing overseas and being a part of that and helping that and assisting it. And oh, by the way, we can make a pretty good return while we're at it. But this is something that I find probably most exciting. Again, many of you have had the opportunity to get out there. I've had the opportunity to live overseas, spent a good part of my career in Asia. And there's no doubt in my mind, I've been to probably 40 countries in my life. There's no doubt in my mind that this is the greatest country in the world. As dysfunctional as we are at times, there's no doubt in my mind that talk about something in the water in this country that allows immigrants to come in and start companies like eBay and Google and Tesla. All these things are being started here. They're not being started in places like France or China. They're getting started here. So exciting things going on, but I find this to be the most exciting. So remember those 7 billion people. Extreme poverty, which means that you live on less than $1.90 a day, is now less than 10% for the first time ever in human history. That's exciting. That's a world of opportunity. And the Bill and Linda Gates Foundation believes that we are on a trajectory such that in 2030, that extreme poverty will be completely eliminated. There are great things going on in the world. This is a beautiful, beautiful time to be alive. I had the opportunity, and I know this is going to sound like a name drop, and it is a name drop, but as you probably know, Wells Fargo Warren Buffett is our largest shareholder through Berkshire Hathaway, and we're his largest shareholder. And so he visited a leadership meeting that we had earlier this week. And I've had the opportunity to meet him a couple times. And his optimism, he says, the luckiest person to ever live is somebody being born in the United States today. And that optimism of all the great things that are going on in our country and the world. But let's talk a little bit about what's going on in China. So here with the green line, these are the other developed countries. This is the US, the UK, Japan. And up here with a much higher growth rate, but decelerating, is that for China. And this is, to some extent, what many, many people are worried about, is that much of the growth globally has been carried on the backs of an emerging China. And now they have growth rates that we would crawl over broken glass to get to here in the United States, but nevertheless, it is decelerating. And that is certainly a reason for concern, but let me set that aside for a moment by showing you this graph as well. And this shows economic production per person, GDP per capita for many countries. And as you can see, in China, it's about $8,000 per person, whereas in the United States, whereas in the United States, it's 56,000. So my point being, and many of you have had the opportunity to get to China, is that there is still a long ways to go before they catch up to the United States. And so even though they're slowing, they, like all of us, are chasing their version of the American dream, in this case, the Chinese dream. I'll pause here for a moment and just a few reflections on China. As I mentioned earlier, I did have the opportunity to live in Asia for many years, and I happened to be there at the time of if you recall, Hong Kong was under British control there was a 99-year lease, and in 1997, 20 years ago, that lease ran out. And there was many of us, myself included, we spent countless hours doing the economic analysis of what would be the impact of the Chinese takeover of Hong Kong. And if you were there in the mid-90s, you would have seen that all construction activity had stopped. People were so concerned about what would be the impact of the communist takeover. Many wealthy Hong Kong citizens were taking up dual citizenship. Vancouver saw an influx of Chinese immigrants. And yet the interesting thing is, and again, this was 20 years ago, and a friend of mine reflected upon this. He says, we got it all wrong. We got it all wrong. 1997 wasn't a Chinese takeover of Hong Kong. It was a Hong Kong takeover of China. And you had capitalism unleashed on 1.3 billion people. And for those of you that have been in Asia, have been in Southeast Asia, you know that capitalism never went away in China. It was alive and well. And so some very, very exciting things going on there. A quick personal story. So we have 4 kids, and our last one just went off to college, but we also, last year, we were blessed to have a Chinese exchange student stay with us. And think about last school year, think about what she saw. She saw the US elections, right? And she, the surprising outcome, she saw this business person, this celebrity, all of a sudden, securing the Republican nomination, being elected president. It was just, it certainly was a surprise to so many. And certainly to her, having, in China where you have the political class, right? The whole idea that you would have a business person or a celebrity become the leader of your country. I was talking with her about that. I said, could that ever happen in China? And she goes, well, you never know. It's always possible. And in some respects, we're already on our way there because we have a wall. It's a great wall. So maybe we ought to take our lessons from them to get that wall built. So a couple of just other quick reflections on China is that, as we talk about the emerging markets, and certainly China is a major emerging market, second largest economy in the world, likely will be the largest economy in the world in the next 15 years. It's important to remember, however, that demographically, they're actually not that different than us here in the United States. The average age in the United States, we have 320 25 million people. The average age is about 35. The average age in China, again, an emerging market, is also about 35 years old. This is different than the other emerging markets. India is about 25, Vietnam is closer to 20. But the reason for this demographic difference of China is the long-term implications of their one-child policy. And so there is a saying in China that, or a question in China is, will China become rich? Will they close that gap between this $8,000 and our $56,000 per person? Will they become rich before they become old? And all the issues that they're dealing with, and they just have to look across the water. When you look at a country like Japan, and again, Japan is where we lived for 6 years of our life, and we love Japan, but Japan is up against a huge, huge demographic headwind. Japan in 2017 has less people than they had in 2016. They are seeing today a decline in their population. They will have less people next year than they have now. And again, I love Japan. Of our 4 kids, one of them we adopted from Japan. He's Japanese. And so I say this with all respect and love for the country, but as it relates to, to immigration, they've become xenophobic. They will not open up, and this is what they need to solve the challenges that they have in Japan. And to put it very starkly, in Japan today, as you talk about an aging society, you have a country that sells more diapers for adults than they do for infants. Think about the implications for society for that. It's now the interesting thing about Japan is, and again, I go back and forth from there all the time, and they are dealing with some severe aging issues, some severe demographic issues. They're losing their workforce. And yet, a few years ago, they made this amazing discovery where they found this untapped workforce, this highly educated workforce, this very hard-working workforce. And all they needed to do was to unleash the power of this untapped workforce upon their economy, and it would be so very, very helpful. And this untapped workforce that they had found was their women. Think about that, right? Culturally, they had all these educated women that they were not leveraging into their workforce due to all sorts of glass ceilings and cultural norms. And so now they are starting to their great credit, they're starting to open that up. You're seeing some good progress taking place there. You go to Tokyo today and you will see women cab drivers. You will see women truck drivers. You will see, kid you not, I was at an office meeting and looked out the window washers, a woman on the scaffolding 40 floors up. This is what's going on. This is the necessity being the mother of invention, even in countries like Japan and maybe China at some point. So let me talk to you a little bit about what's going on in Europe. I share a few comments there first. Brexit is top of mind for everybody. Brexit is important. It's a leading indicator to the future of what's going on in the EU and what's going on with the Eurozone. But in context, keep in mind that the UK has actually relatively minimal impact on the rest of the world. Certainly if you're in Ireland, it has a big impact. On the EU, a little bit less. And here in the United States, the impact is even less. But I don't say this to minimize the challenges, more the existential issues that they're dealing with. But I'll tell you what really concerns me the most about what's going on in the European Union is this. All the silly names that we could be faced with. Think about this. We've had Brexit. We've had Frexit. We've had Grexit. We could have Austria. We could have Belgium. We could have Sweden. Quiddly. DePortugal. And my favorite, check out. So let's hope that the EU does not break up, otherwise we'll have to deal with all that. So, as we look outside of our country, one of the biggest concerns that people have investing here in the United States is that the U.S. market is at these all-time highs again today. Price-earnings ratios, how we value U.S. stocks are very, very stretched, 19, 20 times earnings. The interesting thing is that as you look outside of our country, the blue line being the United States, the green line being developed countries and the purple line being emerging markets, is that there is a world of opportunity. If you're worried about investing in the United States because it's too high, look outside the United States. Valuations are much cheaper. You're not going to be investing at all-time highs. Most of these markets are still 20, 25, 30% off of the highs that they saw before the Great Recession. You're going to see tremendous value, not only valuations, but great growth rates, great demographics. So a lot of exciting things going on outside of our country as you're looking for investment opportunities. And beyond that, the yields are attractive. Here in the United States, our 10-year Treasury trades at about 2.3%. Our U.S. stock market has a dividend yield of about 2%, and yet if you look outside of our country, you can get much more attractive yields than you can find here. So let me bring it home before we turn over to Dr. Bailey, and again, we'll look forward to your questions and be thinking of those. But as an investor, as the chief investment officer, I never want to leave without the opportunity just to give you a little bit of guidance on what you can do for you, against the backdrop of everything that's going on in our country and the world. And probably the most important message that I would give you in this respect in terms of what you can do for you is this. So you all go to graduations and you always hear this message, right? Follow your heart. Follow your heart, right? Vocationally, follow your heart. Academically, follow your heart. Certainly romantically, follow your heart. If I can leave you with one message regarding your heart financially, don't follow your heart. It'll crush you every single time. Don't follow your heart. Don't follow your heart. Don't follow your heart when it comes to things financial. And here's here's some evidence. Over time, over this time period here of about 20 years, the S&P 500, the stock market, has returned somewhere close to 8%. The average U.S. investor, unfortunately, has gotten less than 5%. Why is that? One is investment selection, but even more so is the timing of U.S. investors. We always tend to want to buy high when things are exciting, when things are ecstatic, when there's euphoria in the air, and we always want to sell low when things are despondent and when we're worried. And that will hurt you every single time. Another example of this is that if you miss the best days in the stock market, so over this time period, the stock market returned a little bit less than 8%, but if you missed the best 20 days over this time period, and this doesn't mean 20 days per year, this means 20 days, because you can, if you ever hear someone saying, oh, I got out of the market just before it tanked, ask them this, when did you get back in, right? Because you got to be right not once, but you got to be right twice, and the problem is that you can miss the bad days, but you can also miss the good days too. And if you missed the 20 best days, you would have reduced your returns dramatically. And if you missed the 50 best days over this time period, you actually had a negative return.
And I went through that time frame at one time. That's 6,180 trading days, give or take a couple holidays. So think about that ratio, 50 best days out of 6,180.
Because the market can certainly melt down. We've all seen that. But the markets can also melt up. So here's 4 steps to successful investing. If you want to take everything that's going on out there, all the bad things that are going on, because bad things, there's plenty of bad things to worry about. Something's going to happen. The stock market corrects on average every 11 months. That's a 10% decline on average every 11 months. We are now in month 17. We are in the second longest expansion in U.S. history. A recession will come, a correction will come. But nevertheless, despite all these fearful things, there's a lot of great things going on as well, and we don't want you to miss that. So the 4 things that I would leave you with before I turn it over to Dr. Bailey is this. As an investor, you want to make sure that you have a plan. You want to match your investment strategy with your financial goals. Too many investors start with the question of, how do I feel? You never want to ask yourself that question. It doesn't matter how you feel. The most important question is, what am I investing for? Is it a short-term goal or is it a long-term goal? To the extent you're a golfer, your club selection is always determined by how far are you from your goal. If you have to hit the ball a long ways, then you pull out your driver or a fairway wood or a long iron. But if you're on the putting green, you're going to pull out your putter. Too many people, because of this psychological trauma that we have been through, are effectively playing the entire game of golf with just their putter. And they're up at the tee box, and they're saying, I've never hit the ball out of bounds with my putter. I've never hit it in the woods with my putter. I've never hit it in the water with my putter. Yeah, but you're going to shoot 200, you know, so some people might think that's pretty good. But so you want to match your investment strategy to your financial goals. You want to construct your portfolio. You want to be diversified. Something you know here very well in Colorado Springs is you want to be all weather, because you could have rain and sleet and snow, or it could be a brilliant blue sky day of 90 degrees, and you never know what kind of weather you're going to get. And you want to have all-weather tires on your car. You want to have an all-weather portfolio. You want to have some stocks, some bonds, some commodities, some real estate, some hedge funds, some private equity. All of these component parts, these are all part of the basic food groups to be well diversified, and you determine the percentages based on how far you are from your financial goal. Hopefully you've heard this very loudly and clearly. You want to make sure your portfolio is globalized. Tremendous things going on outside of our country. As a general rule, about 1/3 of your portfolio should be outside the United States. So whatever your allocation is to stocks, about 1/3 of that should be invested outside of our country, in the developed markets, in the emergent markets. Whatever your allocation to bonds is, about 1/3 of that should likewise be outside the United States. Whatever your allocation is to real estate, and this is a difficult one because so many times real estate investors are so concentrated in their own regions or a specific industry. They only have apartments or they only have office buildings. You want to diversify that as well. You want to globalize your portfolio. There's tremendous things going on outside of our country as well. And lastly, you want to maintain alignment to your plan. You hear this term all the time of buy and hold, buy and hold. And I agree with the spirit of it, but I actually prefer the term of buy and manage. If you leave your portfolio unattended to, your portfolio will quickly get out of balance. If you haven't touched your portfolio for a while, more than likely because the U.S. stock market has done so very, very well, you probably have too much U.S. equities in your portfolio right now. Your goals change. Your temperament for risk change. The markets change. And so while buy and hold is philosophically a good idea, I think a better way is to say buy and manage, or said another way, to rebalance your portfolio. So anyway, there you have it. You've got a perspective on the domestic markets, a perspective on the global markets, and then most importantly, a few thoughts on what to do about it. And with that, I'll turn it over to Samuel. Thank you.
Thank you, Erik, and thank you, Michael, for the national and international outlook. Now we have a video from Shailene Bhatt, Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Transportation, and Greg Phillips, Director of Aviation for the Colorado Springs Airport.
Hello, I'm Shailene Bhatt. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Transportation. We're very happy that SB 267 passed last year. Obviously it's important for infrastructure, it's important for rural hospitals. I know Governor Hickenlooper was very supportive. I think the challenge for us is it's $1.8 billion over the next 4 years, but we're going to have to pay back $1.2 billion of that over the next 20 years. And so we have $9 billion in unmet needs around the state over the next 10 years. So it's, I don't want to say we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, but it doesn't solve our problem. There's going to be projects that are going to be accelerated, and there's going to be projects you're going to have to put on the shelf. What we can't do is build new projects and sacrifice our asset management program. When I became the Executive Director of CDOT in 2015, there were a number of priority areas around the state. Obviously, I-25 between Denver and Colorado Springs, the two largest cities in the state. The fact that it's connected by the exact same interstate as was laid down in the 1960s doesn't make a lot of sense. So we, as the Department of Transportation, have made a commitment to get that project ready to go to construction in summer of 2019. Now, there's a lot of stuff that has to go into that. We're going to have to get consensus business around alignment, properties that might be needed, and most importantly, where we get the funding. But we're ready to put that project under construction in 2019 and have it done by 2021 if all the stars align, and that's what we're working towards. At the Department of Transportation, safety is always our #1 priority, so we want to look at the safety benefit ratio of a lot of these projects. Economic development, incredibly important. You know, we know when trucks and cars are sitting in traffic, that causes a problem for us, so that's another criteria. We have different pots of money that we can use, and so, you know, certain money can be used in certain places, so that's something that has to come in. But we work with locals, we work with the communities to try to make very tough decisions around scarce funding. Well, I would say in Colorado, because of Tabor, whatever tax solution is the best is the one that the voters will vote for. I think what is important for people to understand is that this somehow gets played up as a Democrat-Republican issue or a red state, blue state issue. Lots of pretty red states, Wyoming, Idaho, Nebraska, Iowa, Texas, have increased their gas tax in the last couple of years because for them, it's a conservative principle that they're not going to turn their roads and bridges over in worse shape to their children than they inherited from their parents. And people say, well, why can't government do more with less? In 2007, the CDOT budget was $1.7 billion. 10 years later, in 2017, our statewide budget is $1.4 billion, and that is not inflation adjusted. So we're spending less money on infrastructure than we were. Costs are going up. Something needs to give. You know, local government is an incredibly important partner for us in terms of expanding state highways. And the reason is simple. We don't have the money to go out and fulfill everybody's needs. And so, you know, the old proverb says, you know, we want to help those who help themselves. I was just at a meeting at the White House in which they said that, you know, people are waiting for the federal government to come in and solve these problems. And we want to help those states and communities that are helping themselves. And so we're adopting some of the same approach. So those communities, so whether it's the folks up north on I-25 who contributed significant money to the expansion of I-25 up in Weld County and near Fort Collins, or the communities down here in the Springs area and Pikes Peak area that are willing to have that conversation, we want to help people who want to help themselves.
Hello, my name is Greg Phillips, and I'm the Director of Aviation at the Colorado Springs Airport. Well, we hope we can continue to raise our air service levels indefinitely. We have seen tremendous growth, over 25% for the year so far, and that growth we expect to continue throughout this year. We're constantly in an effort to bring in additional air service, and we'll continue that effort. At the Colorado Springs Airport, we've seen some tremendous growth in these last several months with the addition of 5 new routes with Frontier and 2 additional routes with Frontier that are starting this fall. There are a number of other routes that we see that hold promise for Colorado Springs, and we continue to meet with the airlines, talk with the airlines on an ongoing basis, and plan meetings at their headquarters to talk about some of those routes. So we see a bright future ahead. One of the things I think is valuable to recognize is that the airport is so much more than just the commercial airlines and commercial terminal. In addition to that, we have the general aviation and business side of the airport, where we've just seen a brand new executive terminal for Qatar Aviation open. We've also seen a 60,000 square foot hangar for Sierra Nevada Corporation open, and we have great hopes for up to 55 acres of development by Sierra Completions, a subsidiary of the Sierra Nevada Corporation. All this development holds tremendous promise for the airport and future growth. In addition to that, we have Peterson Air Force Base as one of our primary tenants, and we also have a 900-acre business park that we're working hard to develop right now. So well beyond just the commercial side of the airport, we see great promise and tremendous opportunity for growth at the Colorado Springs Airport.
Give that a round of applause of improving our transportation. So now I am very happy to welcome up to the stage that crazy red-headed economist who first initially got me involved in this event. and who makes economics exciting, Dr. Tatiana Bailey.
Okay, got it up already. Thank you so much for all of you for being here today. First and foremost, like always, I like to thank my sponsors. Let's take this off here. Probably be easier for me to walk around. I'm not tall enough to see over this. I have to actually come out here. So here you have my platinum level and my gold level sponsors. Here you have my silver sponsors. Thank you, thank you. And here you have my sustaining sponsors. And if you want to become a sponsor and you're not, I will make room for you on these slides next year, no problem. Everybody who knows me and has seen me present before, you know that I always start out with a joke or two. I just like to keep things light, a little bit of an icebreaker. These are truly unprecedented times, especially with respect to hair. We have Kim Jong-un. King Jong-un letting his hair down with a submarine in the background. We have President Donald Trump. We have President Donald Trump with his hair up. And his children, the hair wasn't any better. I like the one on the right. I have so many words. I have the best words. Then we have the Federal Reserve Chair, Janet Yellen. My daughter said to me, Mom, if this is how your hair is going to be as an old white economist, I'm going to pretend I don't know you when you get older. And I think she might be related to Gandalf. I'm not sure. Then you can mix things up a little, right? Have some real fun. It's almost the holidays, right? So this is what economists do after they finish looking at data for hours and hours, you know? So anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit on very few national indicators because Michael and Erik did such an amazing job already. Mostly just to show you some forecasts coming from the Office of State Planning and Budgeting. A little bit more on the Colorado state economy and then our local economy. So real GDP growth, as we talked about before, looking at Q2 compared to a year ago, not just to the previous quarter, is 2.2%. That's where we ended up. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see GDP forecasts, and these are pretty in line across different experts. 2.2%, about where we are now for the entire year, and a teeny bit higher for 2018 at 2.3%. Now remember that 2016 was only 1.5%. So that does mean that this year and next we're looking a bit better. Job openings here, which we already talked about. I'd just like to highlight that if you look at 2014 is the year where things really started to take off in terms of jobs in particular. And then you also see when I get to the local data, that's definitely very true for us here locally. Unemployment rate, of course, comes down at the same time. And as of August, not seasonally adjusted, we had an unemployment rate of 4.5%. State of Colorado, about half of that, which is incredible. And then if we look at where we think we might end up in 2017, about 4.5% unemployment rate. And again, a lot of these numbers are from the Colorado Office of State Planning and Budgeting. And then 2018, just a teeny bit lower at 4.4%, and this is for the U.S. The industries that have grown the most over the last 12 years, professional and business services, healthcare and social assistance, leisure and hospitality, construction, of course, and financial activities. And I'd like you to try to remember these sectors, because I'm going to talk about these sectors as well, the high growth sectors for the state of Colorado and El Paso County. Now, civilian participation rate, I think, is also incredibly important to always track. I always look at this metric first and foremost, right after I look at the jobs numbers. Because if you see the red line, you can see the civilian participation rate in 2001 was about 67%, okay? And this is the proportion of working age people who consider themselves part of the labor force. It started to fall after the recession, actually during the recession, and then continued to fall well after. And then now it's finally leveled off, and we've even seen a little bit of upward movement. But remember, now we're only at about 63%. That's a lot lower than the 67%, and of course that impacts our overall ability to grow. And this hints to me that this is not a business cycle issue, this is more of a structural issue in terms, probably more than anything, the skills gap. Now, a lot of people say, well, it's because of the baby boomers, but it's not the baby boomers. I always like to show this as well. The top two lines show your civilian participation rate for 25 to 54-year-olds, prime working ages, and then and that's fallen a bit, although slightly coming back up recently. And then civilian participation rate for 20 to 24-year-olds, the brown line, these are young people, and that has stayed persistently low. That's my major clue that we have a structural issue going on here as well. Now, important to also look at is the absolute number of people who are unemployed in each of these age cohorts. And if you look at the 25 to 34-year-olds, the green, that's the highest number of people unemployed at 1.8 million. So again, that's a major clue that we've got a structural issue. A little bit on U.S. housing. For Q2 of this year, 87% of measured MSAs showed gains. The median home price for an existing single-family home was $255,600, and that's up 6.2%, so definitely some good appreciation. 87% of condos showed appreciation, and that median price was $239,500, and they were up 5.4%. Now, July marked the 65th consecutive month of year-over-year gains, which is pretty incredible. A lot of realtors here today, and they're all going to go out to fancy dinners tonight. Existing single-family home prices for the U.S., you can see that at the end of 2016, the average price $275, median $233. We pretty much got back to where we were prior to the recession, a little bit better. But then if you look at the box for August, we continue to have strong appreciation because the average price by then was $296, median $253.5. So we continue to move upward, but try to remember this picture as well. Inventory has fallen for 26 consecutive months. Of course, that is pushing up prices. Housing inventory in July was 7% lower than it was a year ago. At the end of 2016, housing inventory was at its lowest level since 1999, which is saying something. The sale of new single-family homes up a decent amount, almost 11% from a year ago. But given the demand that we have right now, it really should be higher than that. But we have a lot of available lot shortages across the U.S. and labor shortages, which I think a lot of you know about. And those two issues are particularly difficult here in Colorado Springs. Number of homes has stayed pretty steady over the last 3 years at 5.4 million. 51% of homes in July were on the market for less than a month. So the pace of sales is very quick. For all homes, the days on market was 50. Still pretty fast turnaround. 19% of the sales were all cash, 5% were distressed, only 4% foreclosures, and 1% short sales. The average rate for a 30-year mortgage in July was almost 4%, and it was 3.65% for all of 2016. So some upward movement there, but still quite low by historic standards. Home ownership, a lot of people talking about that. It was 63.7% in Q2, up about 1%. In Q2 of last year, that was the lowest level, home ownership level rate in 50 years. Home ownership rate for those under age 35 was 35% in 2017. And data shows that if 35-year-olds bought houses at the same rate as about 10 years ago, there would be an additional 1.7 million homes today, households. El Paso County, we have about the same home ownership rate as the U.S. We were at 72% before the recession, and now we're down to 64%. Now, what about the state of Colorado? Well, this is the same GDP graph that I showed you before, but now I've put in Colorado in the red. And I've drawn an arrow there where you can see that in 2012 is when we really kind of broke away from the U.S. in terms of our GSP growth rate. And that's basically GDP, but for a state, growth state product. And here I'd just like to show, also in the box in the upper right-hand corner, the GDP growth rate, as I said, for the U.S. for this year is 2.2%. Again, Colorado is probably going to outperform the nation at 2.7%. And we will again outperform the nation probably in 2018 at 2.6%. And these are from the Colorado Office of State Planning and Budgeting. Last year, in 2016, we were the 12th fastest growing state in terms of GSP. And we were in, I think, 4th place. But what pulled us down really were the labor shortages. You know, at 2.2% unemployment rate, that's not surprising. Lower oil and gas prices, less exploration, also hurt our manufacturing. In fact, it brought down our GDP or GSP by about 0.5 percentage point. And that's the lowest level where we have been since 2011, although things are looking up for 2017. Now, the growth that we did have in 2016 were mostly attributable to the IT sector and the professional and technical sector, two pretty high-paying sectors. Also, high growth in real estate, construction, and healthcare. And here you just have how they measure in the state of Colorado. We have a leading indices, which is the red line, and you can see it's still trending up. See how it's been going up quite a bit. I drew a circle around that. The leading indices are things like new business formation, high technology, growth in the high technology sector. It has a large multiplier. A lot of businesses doing business outside the state, so it's new money coming in, a primary industry. A lot of job postings, some recovery in the oil and gas sectors, increasing house permits, and lower unemployment claims. So all of those are looking pretty positive, which is why we're pretty bullish for the state of Colorado in 2017 and 18. And here you can see the upward pressure on the upward movement on the new business filings. I really liked this. This also shows the new businesses in technology. So not surprising along the Front Range, but look at El Paso County is included in there. And that's not what a lot of people suspect, but we also have a lot of growth in technology here. State employment and unemployment. Well, here I have the same unemployment rate, but I just want to show you what the forecasts are in the box. In Colorado in 2017, we're anticipated to have an unemployment rate of 2.6%. Most economists, I don't know if Erik and Michael agree with me, but most economists say that a natural rate of unemployment is about 4 or 4.5%. You have 3 economists in the room agreeing on something. This is very unusual. And then for 2018, the unemployment rate a little bit higher at 3%. But again, still a very, very tight labor market, good and bad. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Now, I always like to step back and say, well, what are your sectors? What are your main sectors in terms of employment? So here you can see the #1 sector in terms of employment levels is healthcare and social assistance at almost 13%. Tied for second is accommodation in food and retail trade, then education, professional and technical services, and so forth. Altogether, we had an appreciation in employment of almost 60,000, and that's up 2.3%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but 2% or anything over 2% is a very good annual growth rate in terms of upward movement in employment. And then here are those same sectors and what happened to them from 15 to 16. You can see that all of them had growth. Mining continued to decline, mostly again because of the oil and gas industries. Now, what are your fastest growing industries? So these might not be the largest, but the ones that had the greatest rate of growth. Well, here you can see some of them aren't even very big, like agriculture and forestry. My husband moved here, and fishing is on there now. But you can see there are a whole bunch of these, you know, healthcare, construction, and so forth. And what I like to highlight here, even though some are big sectors, some are small, look at how many. There are 12 that have growth rates between 2 and 5.5%. What does that mean? Doesn't only mean we're growing, it also means we're very diverse. We have a lot of different industries here that are doing incredibly well. Front Range is definitely getting most of the benefit. Front Range in 2016 accounted for 55,000 of the new jobs, or 94.7% of all jobs created. So if you live in the Front Range in particular, it's a very good place to be. Colorado Springs MSA added almost 8,000 of those jobs, 13% of them statewide. Teller 213, much smaller county. Healthcare and social assistance accounted for almost 15,000 of those new jobs along the Front Range, or 27% of them. So that's shows you the strength of the healthcare sector here. Now, supply and demand, you know, of the labor force here. So with this low unemployment rate, if you look all the way on the right, you can see statewide 0.63. Well, that means that we have roughly almost 2 jobs for every person in the state of Colorado. That's how tight the labor market is. If you look at Colorado Springs, 0.82. So we have 0.82 of a person for each job. And I talked to someone in the construction industry, a friend of mine, and he said, well, when my workers show up stoned, that's about right. It's about 0.7, 0.8 of a person. So, maybe that's about right. But it is a little too tight of a labor market. Unemployment rate in Colorado over the course of the year was 1.6% lower than that of the nation. And the State Demographer's Office did a really cool analysis that shows, statistically, over many years, anytime our unemployment rate is 1 percentage point or more lower than the nation, people move here. And that makes intuitive sense, right? People go where the jobs are. So what about business growth and business climate in our state? Well, here are the new business filings that I talked about, new entities. And part of the reason that we're so bullish about Colorado is as these continue to tick up, you know that employment's going to continue to tick up because look at how tightly correlated those two are. In fact, in the 6-month period ending, or 12-month period ending June 2017, we've had a 7% increase in the number of new filings in the state of Colorado, 5% increase in entity renewals, businesses renewing, and about I think it was 6% increase in those in good standing. So you look across all three of those, and businesses are doing very well in the state. Now, taxes, certainly a lot in the news right now about taxes, but this organization, the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, looks at something called a Small Business Tax Index across the United States. And the darker you get into the red and into the brown, those are really high tax states, no great surprise. And here you can see Colorado is actually middle to lower end of the spectrum, so it's a pretty good place to have a business. Because about 94% of businesses are pass-through, meaning the income is passed through to the owner, here you can see that income tax rates are going to be very important as well. And here we're about middle of the road compared to the rest of the United States. And this may or may not change under tax reform. Demographics. I always say demographics are really important because those are your people, right? So here you can see since 1990 and even before then, the state of Colorado has had a rate of population increase about double the U.S. And in 1990 we were at 3.3 million people. Now we're at 5.5 million. And by 2050 we're supposed to be at 8.5 million. So yes, it's a lot of growth. I know a lot of Coloradans say, that's enough. We have enough people moving here. But the truth is, 5.5 million is not that much. So we have room to grow. And as it turns out, we have a lot of young people moving here, which is particularly beneficial. And here you can see that in the red bars, that's the net migration. So we have more of our growth coming from people moving here than we do from natural increase, which is people staying here and having children here, born here. In 2016, we were the 7th fastest growing state percentage-wise, 8th fastest for population growth in absolute numbers, 92% of that along the Front Range, and then of course Denver, the most populous. How does this compare to the rest of the United States? Well, here you can see the percentage of people moving from a different state. In the US, it's 2.4% migration. State to state, Colorado, it's 4%. El Paso County, 7.3%. So we definitely have more migration here. Some of that is undoubtedly the military, but a lot of it is also people moving here and deciding to stay. And then you can see the dark green is El Paso County, more or less in the middle of the state of Colorado, and that's us. And here you can just see the movement in population 2010 to 15 along the Front Range, and net migration is almost the same map. Now, by the time we get to 2050, we're also going to be highly, highly diverse. In fact, ages 44 and younger, between 50 and 60% of the population is going to be either Hispanic, Black, Asian, or another minority share. And even for the 45 and older, it's going to be between 30 and 40%. So huge implications for us there as well. El Paso County, in terms of projections, we are supposed to get, we're one of the high growth counties, we're supposed to get about 400,000 additional people between now and 2050. 86% of all the growth in the state is going to continue to be along the Front Range. Now, education, also very important because we're talking about our future workforce. If you look at the general fund budget for 2017-18, this fiscal year, that's about $12 billion. The lion's share of it does indeed go to K-12 education. The next largest is healthcare. Unfortunately, however, in 1982, the state of Colorado spent about $232 more than the national average, the green horizontal line, than the U.S. Over the years, with Gallagher, Tabor, Amendment 23, and so forth, now fast forward to 2014, and we're spending $2,030 less than the national average. Now, anyone who has any education background studies this, knows that there isn't always the tightest correlation between how much money you put into schools and the outcomes of those students. However, we know that it has some impact, and probably one of the greatest things it's impacting us right now for is teacher shortage, right? So the U.S., it's a low salary to begin with, $36,000, the average starting salary for K-12. In Colorado, $32,000. And this is going to be really important for us moving forward. In terms of higher education, the average for the student-paid portion of tuition is almost 70%, 68.8%. For the U.S., it is 47%. So you can see that we have our Colorado students paying a lot more of their tuition than the national average. And keeping it affordable is clearly an important long-term goal. What about real estate? Well, unfortunately, we're in the top 10 here in terms of the 10 most expensive states. And of course, this is mostly driven by Denver-Boulder area. DC number 1, there we are, Colorado, I think we're number 7, $331,000 on average around the state, median home price, $255,600 for the US. The Housing and Urban Development does this look every quarter at prices and vacancy rates and things like this. And this is for single-family permitting. You can see the state of Colorado for single-family homes over the last 3 years has had increases. So has Utah. And interestingly, no one else has consistently also had increases in multifamily, but the state of Colorado has. So growth in both of those areas. Now, our local economy. Okay, so now I have added GMP, gross metropolitan product, and that is your blue line. And what my arrow there is showing you, I mean, you can see the chasm between us and the U.S. and the state of Colorado starting, mid 2011, and then we really fell way below. But then in 2014, we started to climb back up. And the amazing thing is, I think Wayne Heilman and I did a little dance at UCCS. 2016 numbers came out for GMP. We're actually above the state of Colorado and the U.S. We actually ended up at 3.5% real GMP. Mayor Suthers the other day said 5.4%. That's in nominal dollars, in current dollars. Inflation adjusted, it was a 3.5% increase, which is pretty astronomical. And here you can see in my forecasts, I have 3.1% for all of 2017, so about the same, a little bit lower, because 3.5 is incredibly high. 2018, again, about the same at 3%. Very bullish. 3% is a very, very strong GMP growth rate, especially 3 years in a row. But I'm going to talk to you about why I'm so optimistic. And just to give you some perspective, here are the cities across the United States, the metropolitan areas. And you can see that the blue means good. The darker blue means even better in terms of GMP growth rates. And you can see in the middle there we are. Again, dark area for our region being better than the US in terms of GMP growth. And here, I wanted to see how this compares to other cities in the state of Colorado. And I got so excited when I did this, I made it a 3D graph. So you can see that Colorado Springs, 3.5% growth rate that I talked about. Fort Collins is only a little bit higher, so we're just not going to talk about that. And then metro portion all the way on the right, the 1.7% real GDP growth for them. And in fact, we truly are standing out. We're taller than Boulder, taller than Denver. I just feel tall all over, so I'm feeling pretty happy. Now, In 2016, 70% of the metro areas did see an increase, which is quite good. Look at the sectors that grew the most: professional and business services, information, finance, insurance, and real estate. Very, very similar to the US, and in fact also quite similar to the state of Colorado. We ranked 83rd out of the 382 metro areas, and we were in the top quartile. And I think last year we were, or the previous year, 2015, I think we were 85th. So we're moving up, and it's looking pretty good for 2017 to perhaps move up again. Same thing. What are the biggest sectors here? Is it the military, call centers? What is it? Well, it's actually professional and business services at 14.4% of GMP emanating from this sector. Military is number 2, tied number 3 with finance, insurance, and real estate. And when I show this throughout the year, people are often very surprised. They just always assume that it's military by a long shot. And then you can see some of the other sectors, government, healthcare, and so forth. Now, we unfortunately do not get consumer sentiment, because that's an important thing to look at as well, and we're quite high in the US, but I like to look at a couple of other things. Here you have new vehicle registrations, pretty good upward trend, but look in the box, those are your luxury utility vehicles. Year over year, they've been up 15%. And why look at that? Because that's an inelastic good. People only buy this if they're feeling pretty confident, because they're more expensive. Sales and use tax, that has a nice upward trajectory, up 4.3% August 2016 to 17. But this is really cool. There is a local market research firm called Elevated Insights, which is in the process right now of polling Colorado Springs residents on several things, and one of them is consumer confidence. And here you can actually see that compared to the US, we are significantly more confident here than in El Paso County than the US. If you look at present situation, how people are feeling for today, we're 21% higher. The expectations for where we will be in the short term, 29% higher and more confident in Colorado Springs. And overall consumer confidence, 27% higher. So that's telling you something. I think Erik alluded to it in terms of that palpable feeling that people are quite optimistic in Colorado Springs right now. What about our local employment? Well, here we have all the unemployment rates now, the US, Colorado, and El Paso County at 2.6%. This is not seasonally adjusted. Incredibly low, also quite low for Pueblo and Teller counties. And then you can see my forecasts here for unemployment for 2017 and 18. Now this 2017 at 3.1%, that's the average for the year. As of right now, we are at about an average of 3%. If I turn out to be wrong and it's a little bit lower, that's okay. Moving up a little bit to 3.6% in 2018, and that's pretty much in keeping with the increase that the state is also projecting. Now, what are our biggest sectors in terms of employment? The first one is healthcare, not unlike the state of Colorado. Military is number 2, retail, accommodation, professional, and technical services. So you can see the industries that are the biggest industries in terms of people employment. The sectors that saw the greatest amount of growth were healthcare, accommodation and food, retail, construction, and so forth. So here again, you can see very similar across the US. These 7 sectors accounted for 6,500 of the 7,700 new jobs that we had all over the course of 2016. So how many jobs do we actually need in order to match our population growth? That's a very important question. Is 7,000 or 8,000 good? Is it bad? It's actually quite good. I've drawn a line, the blue dotted line, to show what are the number of new jobs that we need in order to match population growth. Pretty easy to figure out in terms of ages and so forth. That number is 5,400. And you can see that up until 2013, we only had 1 year where we met that and had significant losses during the recession. 2013, we finally met that number, 14 as well, and then in 15 and 16, we actually exceeded that number. So that's part of the reason that I'm highly optimistic moving forward. Now, The other reason for optimism is we also have good information here locally, like the jobs information that Erik and Michael shared, the job openings. We also have local job openings. So for Colorado Springs, in September, so we just pulled these numbers, the average number of daily openings was almost 12,000. That's a lot of job openings for an area our size. Average posting duration is only a month. That means the jobs are moving pretty quickly. The median salary, this is pretty interesting, 72,000. And we are now higher than the Colorado median, which is 65,575. Now, when I came here, it was the other way. We were lower, and I've only been here 3 years. The last time that these two medians were close to each other was in April of 2015, about 55,000. So you can see the upward pressure that we've had on wages here. And to me, the fact that we've surpassed the Colorado median tells me we're having more professional and higher skilled jobs being posted in our area. And in fact, here they are. Here's the top 10. I get a list of 300 or so, but the top 10, first two, registered nurse and software engineer, go back and forth in terms of number one spot. But you can see that 5 out of the 10 are indeed professional postings, and 4 out of the top 10 are in IT, which I think is really interesting as well. For August, this data lags a little bit. For August, the total average number of job postings was 12,500, and the supply of labor, people looking for work, was only 8,700. So that shows you how tight our labor market really is. And there you see a pictorial representation of it, supply and demand. And then if we go back and we look retrospectively, Q1 of 2006 to Q1 of 2017, here are your sectors that have grown the most in terms of employment: healthcare, accommodation and food, education, professional and technical services, and a decline in manufacturing. But again, this is very consistent with what we've been seeing not only across the US, but now also with the job postings. The Colorado Department of Labor and Employment does projections all on their own without any input from me. And they are saying that between 2016 and 2026, these are the sectors that are going to grow the most: healthcare, accommodation, and food, a lot of the same ones that we've been seeing. And they're projecting about 65,400 employees gained in this 10-year time span at about a 2% annual average rate of increase. And again, that's pretty good for an annual rate of increase. And then I also like to look at what are the businesses that have been growing, the new establishments. Well, if you trend the past 10 years, it's actually professional and technical services that has grown the most. So all of this, to me, solidifies that we have a tremendous amount of growth in the professional sector, and that's why you're going to start to see even more growth and appreciation in terms of wages. Now, where are we with wages today as compared to Colorado and the US? Well, the news is not quite as positive here. For per capita personal income in 2015, the new numbers will come out for 16 in November, the US metro portion, cities, was almost 50,000. Colorado was a little higher at 51,000. But look at where Colorado Springs is. We're at about 44,000. Now, some of this is due to the fact that we have a lower median age, so we have more children in the denominator, but that's not the full story. Now, before I jump into that, I just do want to show you where we stand compared to some other MSAs, Austin, Boulder, and so forth. You can see that we are, per capita personal income, we are a bit lower. Now, we are moving in the right direction, because if you look at 2015 to 2016, look at wages barely moved at all. El Paso County 1.2%, Colorado even less, and US 1.2%. But then look at what's just started to happen recently. We're finally starting to see good appreciation in wages. From Q1 of 2016 to Q1 of 2017, El Paso County had an 8.1% increase in wages. Much needed. Much needed. Colorado also had good appreciation at 8%, and the US at 7%. Now, you would think, well, we caught up, right? Not really. And a lot of it is because we started out quite a bit lower. El Paso County average annual wage for private industries was $48,000 in Q1 of 2017, but it was about 10,000 higher in the state of Colorado, and in the US it was about 58,000. So if you compare us to Colorado, we are 19% lower, unfortunately, in annual wages, average annual wages, and we are about 17% lower than the US. So we need to continue to have upward pressure on wages, especially if we're going to continue to attract and retain some of the talent that we need for our growing businesses here. And these lower wages may be part of the reason that we are starting to, that we have been seeing a lower employment to population ratio. Now, I don't have survey results to confirm this, but it does make intuitive sense that if wages are a bit lower here, you don't have people entering the workforce as much as you could. The red bars are the US, and then the blue bars are El Paso County plus the military. So you can see we have some room to make up. Now, this is part of the reason that as a result of the Economic Forum 2 years ago, a group of us came together, women, just saying, and we created this thing called a workforce asset map. And these are incredible people from Pikes Peak Community College, Pikes Peak Workforce Center, the Chamber, the city jumped in and contributed, as well as the county, Catalyst Campus. Just a great group of people. And just to be clear, this is different than this WHAM. It's not that WHAM. It's this WHAM. So here you can see, what is this thing? The Colorado Springs Workforce Asset Map is a one-stop, free, online tool that helps job seekers, employers, and students identify and easily access workforce-related resources within the Colorado Springs region. So what this group kind of decided is that, you know, maybe Harrison School District was doing something with their career track program, but they needed to know more about what industries needed, okay? You know, maybe a business is thinking about moving to Denver, and yet they say, well, you know, we just don't have enough graduates in IT or whatever the case may be. But maybe we can put all this information into one website, and that's what this is, and this is what it looks like, and we decided we felt like superheroes. So you can see here, it's very easy to manipulate, and by the way, this is we're just in the testing phases now, and it's up, but it's not going to be fully operational until about another 2 to 3 weeks. So here you can say, what are you? I am a student, I am a job seeker, or I am an employer. So let's pretend you say I'm an employer. Well, who needs help with hiring or posting a position, learning about labor supply, and so forth? Well, let's just say you need help with hiring or posting a position. Well, what type of position? An internship, an apprenticeship, or a job, a permanent job? Well, let's just say you say an internship. Well, what kind of intern do you need? Are you looking for a high schooler, an undergraduate student, a graduate student, a veteran? Well, let's just say you say a high school student. Boom, you're going to get a list of resources with active links for these school districts, plus a whole bunch more that got cut off. But this is the idea of it. I mean, there are a whole bunch of rabbit trails you can go down. But I have to say, I really would like to acknowledge UCCS and the engineers who are working on this, because we were able to do this for a much lower cost because the engineers at UCCS were willing to do that. A little bit on demographics. We talked about average age earlier. This is median age. US, the median age is 38. El Paso County, 34. So we are spring chickens. In fact, you can look here in the upper right-hand corner. I've circled El Paso County. Lighter color means younger. We are aging. That's undoubtedly true. You can see the 65 plus, but the nice thing about El Paso County is we also have increases in 0 to 17, 30 to 49, and 18 to 24. And of course, those are your prime working ages and future workforce. We are indeed very veteran heavy here. The US has on average 7.4% of the population is a veteran. State of Colorado, almost 9%, and we're at 16%. We have about 85,000 veterans here. We are definitely more educated. Concentrate on the ages 25 plus. If you look here, Colorado Springs, We have almost 35% of our population having some college or an associate degree, both higher than Colorado and the US. And for a bachelor's degree or higher, we are even higher than the US and Colorado now at 40%. So this is clearly an advantageous thing for us. What about income? Well, we have a lower proportion than the US that is under 50,000 in terms of household income. A little bit more than the US and Colorado, 50 to 100,000, about the same as Colorado for 100 to 200,000, and lower than Colorado for 200,000 plus, except for this room. Here we have also the poverty rate in the US, and remember that for an individual to be poverty level or below, it's about 11,000, almost 12,000, and for a family of 4, it's about 24,000. Across the US, 14% of the population is at that. Colorado, 11%, we're 11.4%, so we are lower than the US. So, in context, the military is not quite as large as it used to be. We have great regional job growth across many sectors. We're smart and educated and young. We do have 3 structural issues. Our employment to population ratio is a bit on the low side, probably tied to the average wages that need some upward movement, more upward movement. And we have low public educational funding, and that could impede our future growth. Definitely important to keep that in mind. Housing in Colorado Springs, we had an appreciation greater than the US at 9.6%. Our median price at the end of Q2 was $284. Denver had a 7.6% increase. Their median price is $424.5. Boulder's median is almost 600,000, and they are up 8% Q2 to Q2. Boulder is now the 6th most expensive city. Denver is the 13th, and we are 28th. Single-family home sales increased 15.6%, condos 14.7% from 2015 to 16. Comparing August to August, sales are up about 14%, so a little bit lower, up 13% for condos. And then this is interesting, the ratio of active homes to sales in 2014 was 4. So, 4 homes for sale, for each one that was actually sold. In August of 2017, that ratio was only 1.38. So it really shows you how tight the market is. And here you can see what's happened with home sales. Now, remember earlier I showed you average and median prices. This is actually for all homes, new and existing. And you can see our area has higher average and median home prices than we did prior to the recession, more so than the US. And then you can see as of the end of 2016, for instance, the average price was $286, and now we're at $314 almost. So we continue to see strong upward pressure. And then for existing homes, this is the same as the US, which I have in the bottom right. You can see that our sort of recovery after the recession, we have appreciated more so than the US, which is more of a U shape, like the bottom graph. In Q2 of 2017, median prices are listed there, and we had 1.2 months supply in August in the Pikes Peak region, which is incredibly low. Days on market continues to fall, and number of foreclosures is also very low, even low compared to prior to the recession. Now, having said all this, how affordable are we? Well, if we compare ourselves to the US, it turns out we're actually pretty similar to the US. The US composite, all the way on the right, a higher index is better because this is an affordability measure, income over what you can qualify for. And that index was 165, and we're just about the same at 162. The only one that's better than us here, the 2 that are better are Huntsville and San Antonio, and I'd rather live here anyway. So, and the other ones are actually lower, meaning they're not as affordable. Home building, you can see that we did get very hit hard during the recession, but I often heard that we overbuild. When the economy is good, we overbuild. Well, there's a measure for that. You can just look again at the numbers and see, how many households should we have according to age and so forth. That healthy number of permits is the blue dotted line, and that's about 4,500. And in the early 2000s, it looks like we did overbuild, and this is for single and multifamily. 2016 was the first year that we actually got back to more or less normal levels. Now, the interesting thing is that I do projections for this in my booklet, which is online now. You guys have a version, a shortened version on the tables. But for 2017 and 18, notice that I've got the permits down again. And this is, again, due to many things like the shortage of available lots, expensive construction costs, shortage of construction-related labor, and so forth. So, you know, we have some constraints in terms of home building. And I talked about that. In terms of prices, where do we think we're going to end up? Well, for 2017, over 2018, I am projecting a 9.5% increase in prices, so about the same as last year, and that's a lot in 1 year. And we'll end up, on average for the whole year, about 280,000. Increase another 5.5% in 2018 to almost 300,000. In terms of sales, very modest increases, if any, at all. I was actually talking to a sponsor earlier today and talking about how, you know, we really do have two markets here. The houses that are 500,000 and less are going very quickly and selling quite well. But the over 500 to 600,000 are still taking a long time. $1 million home is still taking a couple years to sell. What about the rental market? Housing and urban development, we're the Rocky Mountain region, Region 8. And here I just like to show for apartments, we are considered a balanced market. From Q2 to Q2, we've actually had a 0.5% increase in terms of vacancy rates, so upward vacancy rate slightly. But then look at the average monthly rent. We're at about 1,000 now, with a 10% appreciation Q2 to Q2. And in terms of the number of percentage of people who live in rental units, you can see at the bottom, El Paso County is about the same as the US, 37%. And this is the percentage of rental households paying 30% or more of their housing. And this is what we would coin as affordable. Anything over 30 is not considered affordable. And you can see Colorado Springs, we actually are at about 48% or so. Better than some and worse than definitely Boulder. Commercial real estate, after the recession, we've continued to see falls in the vacancy rates. And lease rates have been holding pretty steady. Currently, the office vacancy rates are at about 11%, but it's important to note, and I get this information, good information from two sponsors, Jim Justice and Jim DeBiase from Olive Realty. They say that, it's important to remember when looking at these vacancy rates that 3 to 4% of it is sort of not real because the space is obsolete. It's old. Nobody really wants it. And that partially because of that, the supply of office buildings, office space is dwindling. Now, I step back as an economist and I look at this and I say, well, you've got solid economic growth across many sectors and a lot of them are professional, so that requires office space. We have tremendous population growth. We have robust job openings. There's no way the vacancy rates aren't going to continue to go down. And the Olive guys say that around 8.5% vacancy rates, lease rates are going to start to go up. So we have to keep all of those things in mind. And then another thing that they mentioned is that in a tight labor market, like what we have right now, amenities become really important. Nice granite kitchens, sometimes, even a gym and so forth. And a lot of this is also because millennials are so demanding, right? I mean, here we go, right? Spoiled millennials. I mean, he just got to work, Sam. You just got to work, and there he is, taking a break already. So a couple of other major factors to think about is the high cost of building, right? That's another thing that's constraining the commercial market. The natural disasters in the South are only going to exacerbate the labor shortages and increase material costs for construction more, maybe not in the long run, but certainly possible now. And this is true for both residential and commercial. So we're going to see some impact of that. And then here we have the two gyms. Okay, they're not millennials, but see, they're working hard here. And this is their advice, and I think it does make sense. Vacancy rates are going to continue to go up, but supply is not increasing. So, of course, prices are going to increase only further. And it is prudent to move forward with expanding or upgrading your space, which sounds, you know, like they're just trying to sell space, but it does make sense when you look at all the different factors that are going on. You know, maybe it's not the best tactic to think that prices will come down, because it doesn't seem very likely. And another thing to just consider is, well, what are we near? Well, we're near Denver, right? And if you look at Q2 2017 data, look at the percentage difference in commercial space between Colorado Springs and Denver. We're 42% less expensive in retail, 47% less expensive in office, and so forth. So there's no way that a lot of that isn't going to start moving south. It already has. And then just a couple of points on tourism. In 2016, we had a 12% increase over the prior year, 23 million visitors. 57% were day trips, 43% were overnight, with an average length of stay of 4.5 days. Definitely good for retail, for restaurants, and so forth. All visitors spent $2.3 billion, which is a 14% increase over the prior year. And they did a survey, and it shows that it used to be mostly families coming here to visit families, and now it's more about the attractions. And of course, with the Olympic Museum coming soon in 2019, you'll see a video on that in a second, probably that's only going to increase further. And here you have, of course, the occupancy rate. This is the 12-month moving average, has had a nice upward trend, again, since 2014. In August, we were at actually 82%. And this is RevPAR. This is a combination of the occupancy and also the average rate for a room. And that's increased 24% in the last 3 years. And a lot of that is because of our natural attractions here. I mean, the rate in terms of city parks per 1,000 residents here, you can see that Colorado Springs beats out the U.S. and several other peer cities. Employments, look at that upward move just in the last year, and then a huge upward movement just in the last few months for employments. In fact, a 44% increase in the past year, August to August. And as Greg likes to say, look before you book. This is the list of all the different cities that we now service. Some of them are seasonal. And certainly, the more we use it, the more likely it is that they're going to stay. And then this is just my last slide to show you that we were fortunate enough at the UCCS Economic Forum this past year to do work with the Pikes Peak United Way. We did the Quality of Life Indicators Report. And here you can see that one of the categories is the economy, but we actually pulled statistics on all of these. So we have demographics, health, and so forth, transportation. And this is also online. There are two different ways to get it, pikespeakunitedway.org or forum website, uccseconomicforum.com. And it has, you know, a lot of people here own businesses or run businesses. If you need any information, this is a great resource. And many, many thanks to the student that we were able to hire to help us do this, Katya Campbell, who's here. And also, of course, always Rebecca Wilder, who works closely with me. And then lastly, you have a copy of the dashboard. My sponsors get this on a monthly basis. And this is basically what it looks like. We just made it glossier and a little thicker. So you could take it home. And then there's the link to the full report, which is about 36 pages, which goes into much more detail. And thank you.
Wow, that is incredible. We have a very exciting future for Colorado Springs. This past week I was up at Denver Startup Week. It's a large startup event. It's the industry that I'm in. And I talked with so many people, and oh, are you from Denver? I go, no, I'm from Colorado Springs. And I'd get mixed reactions. But when I started to tell them about all of the parks that we have, the estimated population growth over the next few years, how much more affordable it is, I was able to easily change a lot of people's minds if they did think anything negative of Colorado Springs. And I want to encourage all of you to pick up the booklets that Dr. Bailey was talking about so that you too can tell people in other cities about the future of Colorado Springs and be an evangelist for this great city. Now, we will see two videos, one from Dick Celeste community champion among many things, and Mike Duran, CEO of Altea.
Hello, my name is Richard Celeste, and I serve as the chair of the board of the U.S. Olympic Museum here in Colorado Springs. As you know, we broke ground in June of this year, and that construction is going to continue for the next couple of years. It will be really exciting as people see the steel come out of the ground and we get some sense of what that museum will look like. In the meantime, we're going to be working very hard to raise additional money and to reach out and engage the community, because this is something that everyone can participate on. And when we're done, we will have state-of-the-art exhibits that will just knock everyone's socks off. This is a terrific challenge to kind of give you a sense of what this museum is going to be like when it's open. It will begin at the top. You'll take an elevator to the top, and it will be called A Journey to Excellence. You'll start with an engagement with the Olympic values and Olympic history, and then move right to what inspired Olympic and Paralympic athletes to compete. We'll see them in training, and you can train like an Olympian as a visitor. You'll see science and technology and how that's contributing to the success of our athletes, our Paralympians and Olympians. You'll visit the games, but you'll start with the Parade of Nations, which everyone says is the most exciting thing. And then winter games, summer games, every sport, you'll get the experience. You'll end up with a film, a great film of highlights in the Hall of Fame. And when you're done, you'll wonder where you parked your car. Well, tourism is a huge industry for Colorado Springs and this region. And we believe the Olympic Museum and the Hall of Fame will contribute to substantial growth. We think we'll have 350 to 400,000 visitors, many of whom come from out of state, probably 3/4 of them from out of state, to add to what is a very robust $70 million a year industry here in Colorado Springs. We hope we can persuade visitors, even if they're already here, to stay another day, to occupy our hotel rooms, to dine in our restaurants, and to visit the Olympic Training Center as well as the museum. It will be a great additional attraction for tourism here in Colorado Springs.
Hi, my name is Mike Duran, and our company is Altea, and we make user interface software for cars and devices that have displays. And our company's future is quite bright and growing right now as automotive technology and software in cars is growing. Our company's growing with it, and we are following the trend of technology in society, and this has been quite an explosive time for us and a great time to be in software technology. The software industry right now is really feeling a huge shortage of software engineers and computer scientists. And we as a company need young talent that is current, and so we have been working hard to attract software developers from around the world, not just within Colorado or within the US. And so we have been presenting our company, certainly as a cutting-edge company that it is, as well as presenting Colorado Springs as a growing city that millennials can grow with and grow into, and people from all around the world can feel comfortable here and really embrace the diversity and the potential diversity of our city. So with the help of Colorado Springs and the Chamber, we've been quite successful in bringing people from all around the world into Colorado Springs. Altea was founded by two engineers who started at Hewlett-Packard here in Colorado Springs, and we moved to Colorado Springs because of the beauty and because of the size and potential of the city. As we grew as a company, the city began to grow with us, so we felt very comfortable that we could put our roots here and be able to scale up as the city scaled up and as the city matured. And we've been really happy that we have, and we plan to be here for the next 10 years and beyond.
I mentioned at the beginning of the event about how the Economic Forum came about. when Ron C. attended an Econ Forum event in Denver and said Colorado Springs could benefit from it. But Ron wasn't alone. Right there next to him was Dr. Tom Zorline. And you all have heard the saying, teamwork makes the dream work. But I want to ask you, what makes a community work? What makes a city move forward? And I'd like to say it's collaboration within the community, and it's never just one person or one organization doing it. And in this room, we have many of our city leaders that are at the forefront of leading this community to a bright and prosperous future. So I'd like to recognize all of them and recognize all of the leaders of economic development organizations. I've seen the EDC and Chamber members here, SBDC, the Colorado Springs Economic Development Office members here, Center for Nonprofit Excellence, Peak Startup, and many other organizations and growing companies that are making Colorado Springs an incredible city to live in. Plus, the 4 great higher education entities here in the city. Now, like I said, at the heart of this event has always been the community, and it's at this time I want to invite all 3 of the economists to the stage and answer any of the questions that you might have for your organization or just as a community member here in Colorado Springs. Feel free to hand your handwritten questions on the note cards at each of your tables to any of the volunteers that will be walking around. So be sure to look for them so you can get those questions up here. And you can also tweet in your questions with the hashtag #EconForum. So at this time, please come up to the stage. So we have one microphone for the 3 of you.
Yeah, we can handle that.
Can we grab that one too?
That one's going to be for me.
Oh, gotcha.
So one for the 3 of you. So volunteers, please raise your hand. Where are you at? I see one over here, another one back there. So if you have any questions, be sure to be handing those off to the volunteers. And we have a question right up front. So, panelists, the question is, strategies to mitigate or explore the positive or negative impacts of protectionist economic policies. What should we consider?
Yeah, and I'm assuming that's more of an investment question. Is that fair to say? Strategies. So there's a lot of good things going on. You know, we've stayed fairly far afield, except for the hair pictures, from politics. But yeah. But on the political front, there's some very exciting things that have propelled our market forward as it relates to tax reductions, infrastructure, deregulation. In our opinion, one of the biggest risks that we face does have to do with this. The question was about protectionism.
Yep.
Does have to deal with this issue of trade. 99 out of 100 economists would agree that trade is a good thing, where a willing buyer and a willing seller meet. Certainly it needs to be fair trade. It's often forgotten that while the U.S. is a net importer and we suffer a trade deficit, nevertheless we are the world's 2nd largest exporter after China. And so while other countries have a much exports as a bigger part of their overall economy, we are still very dependent upon exports in this country. So overall, increased protectionism, at this point it appears to be more saber-rattling than reality, that would be detrimental from our perspective. That would make us concerned. That would have negative impact regarding the U.S. economy and regarding the global economy, and therefore, from an investment perspective, both investing here as well as abroad would be a problem. If you do see protectionism getting its way, again, that would not be a good thing, but to the extent you did see that happening, you would want to favor more domestically focused U.S. companies. Many times those are what are called small cap companies that don't have much international exposure. But again, many times their cost structure is dependent upon imports, so that could be problematic as well. Dr. Bailey, anything you would add? Or?
Yeah, I mean, you can go back to a book, Name the Forgotten Man, It's written by a woman named Amity Schleys. It's why the Great Depression was longer and deeper than it had to be. And one of the reasons was the Smoot-Hawley tariff. And it didn't have to be, because one of us was our understanding of economics at that time was not that great. And as Erik said, we also have companies that export a lot of stuff, mainly large cap companies. So again, those are some things you want to think about.
Perfect. And this is awesome how many questions we have coming up. So I'll be sure to try and get through as many as possible.
Hey, Samuel, if I could add one thing.
Yeah.
Hey, I see a lot of cookies and a lot of fruit on those tables out there. Be bold. Grab a cookie, please.
All right. So this one came from Twitter, Daryl Wass. If proposed immigration reform takes place, what impact will that have on the workforce and inflation?
It'll be bad, and it'll be bad. Now, I think this shouldn't even really be a political issue, and I think for people who truly understand it, it's not a political issue. This is more of a workforce issue. I mean, Bill Gates many years ago got in front of Congress and said, and this is prior to the recession, and said, my company is going to suffer significantly unless we increase the number of HP-1 visas. You know, when you have capitalist companies coming forward and saying immigration is a good thing, we should listen. And I'm sure both of you also know, and probably most people in this room, immigrants also start new businesses at 2 times the rate of people born here in the US. I am a child of immigrants, and I can tell you that why do they start businesses more? Well, first of all, they're risk takers. By definition, they left their home countries because they thought they could do something better. They were willing to take a chance. They are often very, very hardworking people, and that's across, you know, we see that across the United States. They're usually very sort of thankful to have the opportunities. And first generation, like myself, we tend to do better in school and get more education than our parents did for a lot of the same reasons, recognizing the opportunities. So the key is to do it in a way that is going to be fair to everyone, that is going to be legal, but that's also going to help us in the long run. In terms of inflation, I don't really have anything to say in terms of inflation. I don't know. I don't see the correlation there.
Well, it could be if you get a lack of labor. You need 3 things we talked about to get. Remember, I said 1.5% GDP growth versus what could be 3.1%. You're going to need us to work harder, and out of the OECD countries, 30th wealthiest countries, we are some of the hardest working people on the planet. You need us to be more productive, and you need more people. And it's just simple supply and demand. If you do not have a supply of people to meet that demand, the price goes up.
Thank you. A question regarding the national economy. What is the anticipated effect of the reconstruction of the hurricane and flooding damage in areas in our country?
In the long run, not much. It gives you a shock in the beginning, and if you go to, you know, Keynesian economics, they would say when things get really bad, break a window, because you got to hire somebody to make that window, right, to rebuild that window. But it doesn't give us any more capacity to produce more stuff. That's what we need. But what we found out, it gives them a little shot in the arm in the long run. We do have some reports on that. If you want to give me your business card, I can give you some Wells Fargo economics reports. But in the long run, actually not much.
Okay. And then one local. What is the projected economic impact of the Olympic Museum here in Colorado Springs?
That's a good question. I don't know the dollar amount. I think that I heard in the video, I said at least 40,000 additional people. Now, if you think about the average length of stay being 4.5 days, 2 industries alone are going to be heavily impacted. Hospitality, right? So you're going to have definitely huge increases in hotel occupancy and so forth. And I've talked to several people in the community who say we just need to build more hotels at this point, so that's another great thing. And then of course retail and restaurants are going to significantly benefit from that as well.
Perfect, thank you. And this one's regional and national. Can you tell us about the Hyperloop thing that was mentioned on Facebook and how that could potentially impact our local economy, the national economy, and then we can actually broaden that and talk about I-25 and the airport and the impact that transportation has here in Colorado Springs.
I'm 55, I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook. I wish I could give you a good answer on that. I don't.
I think you know more about the Hyperloop than anyone else does.
I do know quite a bit about the Hyperloop. I'm wondering if this was on purpose.
Go ahead.
So those of you who don't know, Hyperloop is a concept that actually was born in Fort Collins, and Elon Musk flew out those scientists and inventors to talk about the idea, and Elon Musk published a white paper. This was a little over a decade ago, I believe, and it's been a fantasy ever since. I believe it's in the Jetsons, which I've never seen. It shows my age there.
I have.
But where you jump in a tube and it transports you different places. So the idea is it's threefold: completely vacuum tube where there's no air resistance. There is some sort of a car or a transportation pod that has very, very little friction with mag levitation. And then the third one is just the accelerator and decelerator to it. So you can move at very, very high speeds using very little energy, very, very sustainable. The economic impact of that, of just imagine moving people around the United States at 600 plus miles per hour. There's going to be a very, very high economic impact of that. And by the time that these Hyperloops are built throughout the US, there's actually 3 finalist locations here in Colorado Springs through the Hyperloop 1 competition, which is a California company that is really at the forefront of the industry. It's going to be incredible, and there's going to be autonomous vehicles that will take you to the port. So transportation will completely change with the Hyperloop. Try not to be long-winded here, but it will have very similar economic impacts as railway, subway systems, and airports in local economies. And there's some awesome people in the community that are doing some awesome work on it. So we've had quite a few cards as I flip through it mentioning the national debt. Why is that not mentioned? And where do you see it going? What impact will a higher national debt have on the economy? And then the recent tax reform bill. So there's a lot to potentially talk about there.
Yeah, let me start here. I'm sure Dr. Bailey has some thoughts as well. And so you don't know the Jetsons, though? That is real.
I don't know the Jetsons.
You don't know about his dog, Astro? Oh.
Nope.
Oh, man. Gosh. Yeah. Yeah, daughter, Judy. Kids these days.
Aye, aye, aye.
Politically, the things that have us most concerned, that keep us up at night, are this trade issue, are this immigration issue, but probably the thing that keeps us up most at night is this debt and deficit issue. And there's been a lot of attention paid recently to the Dow 20,000, but precious little attention has been paid to debt 20 trillion. And that's where we're at now. And this is nonpartisan because neither of the candidates were discussed in any great detail in the recent election campaign. But $20 trillion in debt is a big number, very difficult to get your head around, so I'll make it real personal. That means each and every person in this room is on the hook for $65,000. 325 million Americans, and everybody's on the hook for $65,000. Oh, wait, it gets worse. That's going up by $2,000 every single year. Right now, we have the privilege of financing that deficit, that debt, at less than 2%, which is a very attractive interest cost. The problem is the maturity of that debt is about 3 years. It sounds like one big adjustable rate mortgage. It is. And that's my concern, is that what happens if we have a substantive increase in interest rates and we have to finance this $20 trillion in debt at much higher levels. And $4.5 trillion of that debt, of the publicly traded debt, is held now by the Federal Reserve, essentially money printing. It was called quantitative easing going in, but if we're intellectually honest, we have to call it quantitative tightening going out. And what happens if there's some sort of misstep as we've gone where no one has gone before in terms of monetary creativity? Oh, and by the way, 57% of that publicly traded debt is held by foreign investors. What happens if there's a buyer's strike? So these are the type of things that do worry us quite a bit. It's not going to happen this week or next week, but I think we will look back and we will say, oh my goodness, what mess did we get ourselves into?
Well, I think you pretty well covered it. Two additional things to think about with the debt. One is that with the proposed tax reform, and of course it's still not clear exactly how that would pan out. There's still a lot of details to be ironed out, but I did see, I think it was from Brookings already, a report that showed we will be at just over 100% of our GDP within the next few years if we implement that tax reform. And by the way, if we don't implement the tax reform, it's not a whole lot better. It's just potentially worse if some of these proposals go through. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing, I also have a healthcare background. And healthcare expenditures alone are a lot of the reason that we're in the trouble that we're in terms of the deficit. So think about it. So we have about 17.5 trillion that we spend per year, 17.5% and 2.5 trillion. There, I said it right. And if you think about 17.5% of our GDP, well, how much do we spend on the military? About 4.5%. How much do we spend on education? About 5.4%. So, healthcare is blowing everything else out of the water. And some of it is definitely that we're aging, but more than anything, it's just that healthcare is so expensive per person. And in fact, about 85% of our healthcare expenditures are in the last 30 days of life. So, that's a whole other presentation, but, looking at these expenditures, we have to be realistic about why are we in this situation to begin with, and have to address those root causes if we're going to look at the longer term picture in terms of how to address the deficit as a whole.
I was fortunate 2 years ago to go on tour with Senator Al Simpson from Wyoming, and if you know Senator Simpson, besides being one of the 5 funniest guys on the planet, he was in charge of the Simpson-Bowles Committee put together by President Obama to figure out the debt, and of course they didn't do anything about it after he came out, but it's momentoftruth.org. And Al was like, we're only negotiating 15% of the budget. But basically what we are in the United States is a big insurance company with an army right now, unfortunately. And the demographics, again, as we said, are going the wrong way. Now, the good thing is I always want to be positive, is when I got into this business in 1985 to manage client portfolios, what did I have? I had stocks, I had some bonds, and I had some cash. I mean, the good thing right now is if we do look at the government inflating their way out of this, which is about the only way they're going to do it. I mean, they're not going to default on their debt. We're going to inflate their way out of it. There's things we can do to handle inflation in client portfolios. And so that is one positive about that.
Thank you. Another one that came on Twitter, tweeted by Trevor Deerdorf. Regarding lagging wages in El Paso County, how much of a factor does a high percentage of retired military play in lower wages and young professional retention?
No, that's a great question. I get asked that a lot in presentations. And, there's no question that, the military, the high military presence that we have here and the retirees, the veterans that we have here, play into this, right? That's going to play into the lower employment to population ratio that I talked about. You can have even a 56-year-old veteran here who is either not working anymore or they're just working kind of part-time to augment their income. And, I have heard anecdotally from a lot of retired military that those individuals are willing to work for less. They have a pension, they have a good government pension, but they still want to do something. So that could be pulling down our wages to some extent. But then I do also have an analysis, which I didn't show today in the interest of time, where I've looked at the average wage for El Paso County, Colorado, and the U.S. by sector, so about 25, 30 sectors. And I don't know that veteran thing is totally driving the lower wages, because there are a lot of sectors that you don't necessarily think are going to be veteran heavy, and yet those average wages are still low. So it's probably a combination of those two impacts, if not additional ones.
Thank you. Another one relating to the military. In regards to K-12 public school spending from Colorado's general fund, do the spending amounts take into consideration the federal spending used for military dependents in Colorado Springs and El Paso County?
Sounds like a tough one. Why don't you take it?
I ask the question again because I'm not sure I fully understand.
Go back to hyperloops.
That'd be good too.
In regards to K-12 public school spending from the Colorado General Fund, do the spending amounts take into consideration the federal spending used for military dependents in Colorado Springs and El Paso County?
So I think that they're asking about the amount that we spend on education as a whole in the state of Colorado versus the amount that we spend for the military, basically.
No?
No. So maybe you should take this question. I really don't know the answer to that. I mean.
Okay, I'll go to the next one.
Okay.
And it'll tie back into that, so hopefully they can get their answer. I was gonna wait till the end because this is priming you to say something. I hope you pick up on this. The manufacturing data used in today's event was a little dated. They have 2012 here. Where can they get more current statistics on manufacturing, and where can people get more economic data information to maybe answer the questions that we aren't able to answer or are all sitting up on the podium today?
Yeah, so it is unfortunate we have two sectors, manufacturing being one of them, that we don't have current data. Rebecca and I look at this all the time and we're like, really? We have to show 2012 data? It is just for two sectors out of all of those. But the reason is this: when you have a small number of companies, the government doesn't disclose it because they're afraid that for all the different subsectors, maybe a fabric manufacturer or so forth, it'll be too clear what company you're talking about. So it's not disclosed. It's considered proprietary information. So until we get more companies into those different groups, often the data is held back and we can't aggregate it. We can't say all of manufacturing did this. We can only say, 3/4 of manufacturers in El Paso County, contributed this much. So unfortunately, we don't have that information. As far as the second question goes, if you become a sponsor, no, just kidding. The dashboards that I put on all the chairs, those have, as I said, the highlights, but you also get the annual information if you go to the link at the bottom. Now, if you're an economist, you look at this stuff all the time and you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Bureau of Economic Analysis. I mean, we have so much information, but it is available, and certainly you can contact me when you have questions, but also there's some really great tools. The state of Colorado, and in fact all states, if you for instance go to Colorado LMI Gateway. What is that? It's actually a gateway to a lot of the state and county information, and some of it is even in nice sort of dashboard form. So a lot of this you can probably extract yourself. I'm just sort of the holder of a lot of that information all together in one place.
Thank you. We have a lot of great questions. Thank you all for writing these in. Going back to the national outlook. Do you see a trade and tariff war on the horizon with the current administration and with China or with other countries?
I hope not. We're looking at Canada right now, which is a really big deal because our two biggest trading partners are Canada and Mexico. And what was it with the airplanes recently? Was it Bombardier? Yeah. That they're slapping tariffs on them because Bombardier is supposedly subsidized by the government and so forth, And I look at this, and when I taught economics and finance, this goes back to again economics 101, and the example I would use would be Brazil and the United States. Brazil is really good at growing coffee. We stink at it. We're really good at making computers. They stink at it. So they should grow coffee. We should make computers and trade. 2 + 2 = 6 there. Now the problem is there's pockets of people that aren't going to do well, like computer manufacturers in Brazil and coffee growers in the United States. We don't want to get in a trade war because, again, just like the last question, a lot of our companies, yes, import, but a lot of them export. I mean, look at all the exporting we do, and if there's a trade war, for every guy it works out, there's maybe 2 guys it's not working out for. And unfortunately, this whole populism, what I tried to show is that forgotten person. And I think sometimes we get the facts wrong, and it's more substitution of capital for labor. As Tatiana said, it's immigrants are not the problem. It's other issues. It's a paradigm shift. Also, people don't want to move these days. There's jobs open, but people, and it might be housing, it might be something else. This has been in The Economist a couple times. People are not that mobile moving for jobs as they have been over the last 50, 60 years.
Wow, interesting. So during the event, mention was made of the negative effects of regulation. Can you speak to the negative effects of under-regulation? Essentially, and once again, this might be a term that's before my time, or I just can't read this very well, but essentially kicking the can down the road. Did I get that right? Yeah?
How does he not know that?
You don't know kick the can down the road?
I don't know kick the can down the road, I'm sorry.
Just kick it down the road, we'll deal with it later.
That makes sense. I mean, I get it now, I just didn't know that was a phrase. Stormwater would be one example.
Okay, let me talk about regulation for a second. And the pendulum does swing. So let's go back 10 years, and when firms were securitizing mortgages, okay, and they put them, if you saw The Big Short, they put them in a very hyper-complex security called a collateralized debt obligation. Now, Erik and I are both CFAs, we studied it, and they're still very hyper-complicated. They went out and partly almost blew up the whole financial system. Did we need more regulation? Probably. I don't know if you guys would agree. The pendulum has swung so far the other way that it's just constricting what we're doing. As I said, we have 28,000 people. If I go and do an event, say 40 people, we call them focus events, the invitation has to go through like 3 people to read the. I'm like the invitation. It's like Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. Remember that when they're on the cliff? Butch, I can't swim. Swim? The fall's gonna kill you. I mean the invitation. But that's where we are right now. And the good thing, like this administration or not, is they want to for every regulation they pass, they want to repeal 2. And certainly we need environmental regulations, we need safety regulations and so forth, but the pendulum has gone too far.
Thank you. Where are we in the economic cycle, and is the stock market near its peak?
We will guarantee you today that there will be a recession. We just won't tell you when. And likewise, we'll guarantee you today that there will be a stock market correction and a crash at some point. We just won't tell you when. The truth of the matter is that we're long in the tooth on both. This has been a very anemic recovery, but it has been a recovery. I would say, though, if you walk down the street and ask 10 people, probably 5 would still say that we're in a recession. We have not been in a recession for 7 years or so. This is, in fact, the second longest expansion in modern financial history. Again, it's been a fairly anemic growth, but it has been a very long expansion. Likewise with the stock market, all-time highs, yes, but more importantly, and what does cause us some concern is valuation levels. We are at fairly pricey valuation levels. We talk about price earnings ratios at about 19 or 20 times. That does cause us some concern. Again, there is a correction in the stock market on average every 11 months, so there will be a correction. Doesn't mean that one comes automatically at month 12. We are now 17 months since our last recession, which was a year ago in February. So It will come, but again, hopefully we've painted a picture of the exciting things that are going on, the good things that are going on in the economy and in the markets, such that there's recognizing what we went through with the Great Recession. We don't think anything like that is around the corner. We're very confident of that.
The only couple things I would add is that one of the things that is most indicative of being late in an economic cycle is a persistently low unemployment rate. And we have been there for quite a while, so that's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about is that if you go back all the way to the 1940s, and you look at when we have recessions, they often happen in the first couple of years after a new administration. That's not an incumbent coming back in, a new administration. And why? Just because of the change implicit in new policies and how that can impact the economy as a whole. So, those two things are, important to keep in context, but then we also have to think the other side of the context, which is we are in the longest expansion that we've seen in 150 years, which is pretty incredible, and it makes it a little more difficult to really predict what's going to happen. Now, mind you, we haven't been growing at 4 or 5 or 6% either. It's been pretty anemic. So it's sort of been slow but steady. And what does that imply? Well, it's kind of unprecedented. So it's a little difficult to say, which is what economists often say, by the way.
Well, when we're taught in our media training, when you give a date, don't give a number. When you give a number, don't give a date. And that's why Harry Truman wanted a one-armed economist, so the guy couldn't say, well, on the other hand. It's economic humor. It's not pretty.
So public companies, even tech companies, private companies, especially tech companies, are staying private longer because of the amount of capital that is out there in terms of private equity and venture capital.
Yep.
Yes. There was an angel investor by the name of Jason Calacanis that just wrote a book called Angel, and he said, how to build wealth in the future will drastically change as technology continues to change. What should a lot of the investors in this room be doing with the companies staying private longer? Should they be looking at investing in private companies? What's your opinion on that?
I may not get this number completely right, but when you look at the number of publicly traded companies, it was like 1996 or 1998, it was something to the effect of 9,500. We are down to 5,000 or so. One, Sarbanes-Oxley. You're looking at people that are personally responsible if something goes wrong. So what do? Erik and I attend our hedge fund conference every year and our alternative investment conference, and I didn't know this. Can anybody guess, even taking out the mom and pop accountants doing it in their basement, what % of companies are publicly traded that give you investment opportunities? 0.2.
Wow.
The rest are private. So what does that tell us? You have to look at other vehicles. And so one of our asset classes are alternative investments, which gives us an opportunity to invest in these private companies. I don't know, Erik, if you have.
This one is for Tatiana. There's been a few questions on this. Where do you see the marijuana industry heading in Colorado and the U.S.? And where is the marijuana money going? Is it going to our schools here in Colorado? Can you speak on that?
Yeah, I was getting that question a lot in presentations throughout the year, and I was giving an honest answer, and that is I need to do more homework. So I finally did the homework, and that doesn't. Somebody's laughing over there. It doesn't mean I got high. I just means I looked up some numbers. So what I basically learned in doing a huge literature review was that, well, more importantly, what I felt was I needed to write some articles on this. And so I started a series in the Business Journal. The third one just came out a couple of weeks ago. The first two are on the economic impact, tax revenue, jobs, total sales. And those numbers are pretty impressive, if you want to call it that, for the state of Colorado. The third one was on health impacts, because one thing that I've found kind of almost irritating was people kept talking about the money that was coming in, but they weren't talking about what some of the costs are. We know that there are health-associated costs. We know that there are safety-associated costs. But I hadn't yet seen a cost-benefit analysis, so to speak. So bottom line, and the fourth one's coming out in a couple weeks, by the way, on safety impacts. The bottom line is that by 2020, so in a couple of years, it's going to be a $1.52 billion industry in terms of sales in the state of Colorado. It's a lot of money. By that time, in a couple of years, it'll be about $150 million in tax revenue. It's not quite as much of the pie in terms of total revenue for the state as most people would think, but it's sizable. So a lot of money. Jobs, it's about 12,000 direct jobs, and that's for the growing, manufacturing, selling, and so forth, even the bud tenders, as they're called, which I thought was really funny. And then another 6,000 jobs indirect, so 18,000 jobs total, okay, including the multiplier. So it's a pretty sizable industry in terms of employment. Now, where is that money going? Well, I actually talked to Jason Schrock, who is the state economist, and yes, a good portion of that does go towards education, but not as much as people think. And then I started to think, well, all this health-related information that I'm reading says it's very dose-dependent. So not unlike alcohol, you know, some people seem to be able to handle it fine, and some people become very addicted and have a lot of the negative health externalities. Now, one thing that is very clear in terms of the health studies is that it really hurts developing brains. So for children and adolescents, the impact is actually not good at all. And there's even some correlation now that we're starting to find with suicide ideation. You know, why are we seeing increase in suicide? It's probably a lot of things, but maybe marijuana is part of it. And we do have almost double the national rate in terms of suicide, the state of Colorado. So these are important things to I think, keep in mind overall. But isn't it ironic that we're putting a lot of the money towards education, and yet it's the children that are getting impacted most negatively? So on that one, I'm actually a little bit on the conservative side.
Okay. We want to say that businesses make decisions based on the numbers, but the heart is important and hard to measure. And I know that you all might not have info on this, and just a shout out for Colorado Springs. It used to be called the Colorado Coalition for Social Impact, but Jonathan Liebert, the president of the BVB, is doing a lot of work on social impact and businesses making decisions, not just on numbers, but on long-term benefit for society. But what are the factors of importance for quality of life to businesses when making decisions and relocating to our great city of Colorado Springs?
So what are the factors that businesses are thinking about?
Yeah, other than just the numbers, so the quality of life here in the Springs.
Yeah, well, you know, part of the reason I showed the graphs on the business tax index and also the personal income tax is because, you know, those are the numbers for a lot of people, right? Why they choose to either stay here or move here. But, you know, I mean, I can speak very personally about this. It was a huge decision for my husband and I to decide to move here from Michigan, probably bigger for my husband, quite honestly. I had to kind of cajole him into it. But 3 years later, we're pretty happy about the move. And I have to say, I was right. It's really great here. And it's great on so many levels. I mean, you know, of course, you've got the natural beauty and the sunshine on, not today, but most days. But there's something that I felt here that has been talked about, and I continue to feel it, and if anything, it's increasing, right? With the momentum of all the good things that have been happening, particularly since 2014, which happens to be the year that we moved here. Yeah, well, we got lucky. But and that really is the community engagement and the community excitement and the networking that's possible here. I mean, Sam even, you know, coming up to me as a student, and I tell him to come, and he actually shows up, and then he's excited, and he tells more people. you know, all of that is incredible. The workforce asset map that I talked about, that's not possible unless, you know, a bunch of people are willing to come together to say, you know what, we need to do something about this. And it takes a lot of hard work, and sometimes you succeed and sometimes you fail, but there's a will here that I sensed the first time I came out here in 2012, and Tom picked me up from the airport at midnight because my first flight had been canceled. You know, I think that that's probably our greatest asset above everything else.
Perfect. And that was our last question. So thank you very much for being up here. And thank all of you for those great questions. Now we'd like to show a video from our very own Hannah Parsons, who is the Chief Economic Development Officer at the Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Center, and also a video from Todd Baldwin, founder of Red Leg Brewery right here in Colorado Springs.
Hello, I'm Hannah Parsons with the Colorado Springs Chamber and EDC. Because we work with so many local businesses and understand their challenges in recruiting workforce, we've developed a new recruitment tool called ChooseColoradoSprings.com, which is a dynamic tool that equips our local businesses to attract top talent to the region. It helps explain why Colorado Springs is such a top place to live, work, and do business. The Colorado Springs Chamber and EDC is a subrecipient of a grant from the Department of Defense through the Office of Economic Adjustment to Pikes Peak Community College. So though it's a lot to remember, the point of this grant is for us to develop a cybersecurity strategic plan for the region that will unite all the initiatives taking place, and we're very excited about the rollout of that in 2017. The Economic Development Team at the Colorado Springs Chamber and EDC just finalized our 5-year Economic Development Strategic Plan. This process allowed us to take a deeper dive into exploring how competitive Colorado Springs and El Paso County are as a region. It also outlines for our region what target industries we should focus, so we'll be more narrowly focused in our approach. This will allow us to ensure that the Colorado Springs and El Paso County region are more
announcements. All right, as we get the videos queued up, I'm going to have our end of the event announcements. So, as many of you know, there is a door prize at this event, and the door prize is a one-night weekend stay with breakfast for 2 here at the Antlers Hotel. I am still going to keep that to the very end, but that recipient must be here, so do not leave, so that if you are that winner, you can redeem that prize. Those of you who need to pick up real estate consulting or continued education certificates, those will be found in the foyer. There are more sponsored trifolds at the registration tables, and please be sure to stop by and look at those sponsor booths, because all great events that happen here in the city of Colorado Springs and many other cities couldn't go on and happen without their great sponsors. At the UCCS table, there is a glossy copy of the executive summary of the quality of life indicators. And this is where you can get a lot of those statistics that you saw during this event, and you can go home and share them with your office and your community. There's also a one-page infographic that highlights WAM, the Workforce Asset Map. Once again, a definite to pick up. I'd also like to invite all of you to stay downtown for dinner tonight, and to encourage you to do that. Eat at one of the participating restaurants that you have a 15% off coupon to. You can find that out in the foyer as well. On your tables, there is a card promoting a women's resource agency clothing drive at Fabrique for next Thursday, October 5th. Women can donate clothes and then get 15% off any Fabrique purchases. Once again, that's on October 5th. And then don't forget to validate your parking. If you parked in this parking garage, you can do so out in the foyer. And go drink some free beer, compliments of Todd Baldwin, who hopefully we're going to be able to see his video here in a second. And after grabbing your free Red Leg Brewery beer, check out the new Antlers Hotel upscale bar here called the Piccadilly. How are we doing on the videos? We're good.
Hello, I'm Hannah Parsons with the Colorado Springs Chamber and EDC. Because we work with so many local businesses and understand their challenges in recruiting workforce, we've developed a new recruitment tool called ChooseColoradoSprings.com, which is a dynamic tool that equips our local businesses to attract top talent to the region. It helps explain why Colorado Springs is such a top place to live, work, and do business. The Colorado Springs Chamber and EDC is a subrecipient of a grant from the Department of Defense through the Office of Economic Adjustment to Pikes Peak Community College. So though it's a lot to remember, the point of this grant is for us to develop a cybersecurity strategic plan for the region that will unite all the initiatives taking place, and we're very excited about the rollout of that in 2017. The Economic Development Team at the Colorado Springs Chamber and EDC just finalized our 5-year Economic Development Strategic Plan. This process allowed us to take a deeper dive into exploring how competitive Colorado Springs and El Paso County are as a region. It also outlines for our region what target industries we should focus, so we'll be more narrowly focused in our approach. This will allow us to ensure that the Colorado Springs and El Paso County region are more competitive in those jobs we're seeking to attract and grow. We're excited about this plan because it's going to allow us to work well with the community to ensure that we are able to attract businesses, retain businesses, and expand those local employer base as well in the region.
My name is Todd Baldwin, and I'm the president and founder of Red Leg Brewing Company here in Colorado Springs. Red Leg Brewing Company started as really a figment of my imagination back in 2010. I had just gotten out of the Army and decided that I wanted a new career path. And I was working at a desk job, kind of like working in a cubicle, and knew that wasn't the best path for me in my life. So I wanted to open up a veteran-run, veteran-themed brewery. At the time, there's only a few of us across the country, so I was kind of put the pedal to the metal and went for it in 2012. I went to about 29 banks throughout Colorado looking for assistance to start my business. Too young, still in my 20s. Had no business experience, so people weren't lining up to give me any sort of bank loan. So I still wouldn't be stopped from kind of seeing my dream come to fruition. So basically in 8 hours, I took out 18 credit cards, balance transferred $300,000 in credit card debt into my business to get it off the ground, and had my credit shut down the very next day. So that's pretty much how it started. Yeah, so the microbrewing industry has been on a huge climb, an ascent, if you will, for the last probably 10 years. When we started here in Colorado Springs, I think we were the 7th, maybe the 8th brewery that started up. I think now there's well over 30. And I think you're going to see that trend continue. The idea of hyper-local, supporting local, buying local is not slowing down, and I think that's important for our community as we grow, that we continue that trend. So the microbrewing industry is great. It's going to continue to grow. There's such great beer out there in the market today, and we're just fortunate to be a small little part of it. So where's the microbrewing industry headed? That is the million-dollar question. I think if everyone had a crystal ball, they would probably ask that question. I think you're going to continue to see it trend upwards, but I think that's good. Competition's always been good for business, and it's going to make everyone better. And ultimately, that's what you as a consumer, I think, as a beer fan wants, is all of these breweries competing with each other to get better, make better beer, to push the creativity button all the time, and ultimately give back to our community through charities and nonprofits. I know it's important to us at Red Leg, but I know it's important to the entire brewing industry. So I think it's only going to go forward from here. It's going to keep getting bigger, and I think you as a consumer is definitely going to benefit from it.
Awesome. Okay, and now for your door prize. Once again, this is a one-night weekend stay for 2 with breakfast here at the Antlers. Now, when I announce this name, if it is you, I want to hear a shout. I want to hear a woohoo, some sort of excitement here. Because we do have a list of backups, because we know that some people were not able to stay till the end, but they're going to miss out on this door prize if it was them. So the winner is Ann Fetch. Oh no. Thank you for that. But the real winner is Jason Lalime. No, there's another. But the real winner is Greg Stevens. Hey! Come on up. I got your prize in my hand. Perfect. 2 arms in the air and everything. Wow. So please enjoy that.
Thank you, sir.
Of course, thank you. Now, in closing, I want to highlight what Michael said about Colorado Springs at the beginning of his talk. He said, with the amount of excitement and energy he sees coming out of Colorado Springs, as someone who's on the outside, he is taking note. And I quote, said, there must be something in the water here. Let's continue this energy and optimism as we head towards 2018. Thank you all for being a part of this event in this beautiful city we all call home. Have a great night.